Monsieur le secrétaire général,
Secretary General,
Monsieur le secrétaire général, Excellences, chers collègues,
colleagues,
la
the
9738e séance du Conseil de
9738th meeting
sécurité
of the
est
Security
ouverte.
Council is called to order.
Je voudrais saisir cette
I should
occasion
like to
pour
take
rendre
this
hommage
opportunity
au nom
to
du
pay
Conseil
tribute on behalf of the
à son
Council
Excellence
to
Monsieur
His
Samuel
Excellency Mr.
Bogart,
Samuel Bogart,
représentant de la
representative
Slovénie,
of
qui a
Slovenia,
assuré la présidence du
for
Conseil de
his service
sécurité
as
pendant le mois de
President of the
septembre.
Council for the month of
Je suis
September.
certain
I
de
am
me
sure
faire
I speak
l'interprète de tous les
for
membres du
all members of
Conseil
the Council
en exprimant
in
mes sincères
expressing deep
remerciements à
appreciation
l'ambassadeur
to
Monsieur
Ambassador
Bogart et à
Bogart
son équipe
and his team
pour le grand
for the
talent
great
diplomatique
diplomatic skill
avec lequel
with
ils ont
which
mené les
they
travaux du
conducted
Conseil
the
le mois
Council's
dernier.
business last month.
En ce début du mois,
In the
je
beginning of
voudrais
this month,
rappeler que
I
le
would like to
Conseil de
recall
sécurité
that the Security
est un lieu
Council
de respect
is a
entre
place
membres de cette
of
organisation
respect,
et vis-à-vis de ses
respectful
représentantes
amongst
et
members of this
représentants.
organization
Et
and
je prie tous
towards
les intervenants
representatives.
et
And I ask
intervenantes
all
de respecter les
speakers
normes
to
appropriées en
uphold
matière de
the
ton,
appropriate
de
norms
formulation
in
et de
terms of
contenu dans
tone
leurs remarques.
and the wording of the contents of their statements.
L'ordre du jour
The
provisoire de la
provisional
présente
agenda
séance
for
est
this meeting
la
is
situation
the
au
situation
Moyen-Orient.
in the Middle East.
L'ordre du jour est
The
adopté.
agenda is adopted.
Conformément à
In
l'article
accordance with
37
Rule
du
37
règlement
of the
intérieur
Council's
provisoire du
Provisional Rules of
Conseil,
Procedure,
j'invite les
I
représentants
invite
de l'Irak,
the representative
d'Israël,
of
de
Iraq,
l'Italie,
Israel,
du Liban,
Italy,
de la
Lebanon,
République arabe syrienne
Syrian Arab
et de la
Republic,
République
and the
islamique
Islamic
d'Iran
Republic of
à
Iran
participer
to
à la présente
participate in
séance.
this meeting.
Il en est ainsi
It
décidé.
is so decided.
Le Conseil de sécurité
The
va maintenant
Security
aborder
Council will
l'examen
now
du
begin
point 2
its
de l'ordre du
consideration
jour.
of item 2 of the agenda.
Je souhaite chaleureusement la
I
bienvenue
warmly
au secrétaire
welcome the
général,
Secretary
son
General,
Excellence,
His
Monsieur
Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres,
et lui donne la parole.
and give him the floor.
Madam President, Excellencies, the raging fires in the Middle East are fast becoming an inferno. Exactly 1 week ago, I briefed the Security Council about the alarming situation in Lebanon. Since then, things have gone from bad to much, much worse. As I told the Council last week, the Blue Line has seen tensions for years. But since October, exchanges of fire have expanded in scope, depth, and intensity. I stated that almost daily exchanges of fire by Hezbollah and other non-state armed groups in Lebanon and the Israel Defense Forces are in repeated violation of Security Council Resolution 1701. I emphasize that the daily use of weapons by non-state armed groups is in violation of Security Council Resolutions 1559 and 1701. And I stressed that Lebanese sovereignty and territorial integrity must be respected, and the Lebanese state must have full control of weapons throughout Lebanon. Madam President, in the few short days since then, we have seen a dramatic escalation, so dramatic that I wonder what remains of the framework this Council established with Resolution 1701. Israel forces have conducted relentless airstrikes across Lebanon, including Beirut. The United States and France, with the support of several other countries, have proposed a temporary ceasefire allowing for the restart of negotiations. Israel refused that proposal and stepped up its strikes, including bombing the Hezbollah headquarters where its leader was killed. And Hezbollah has continued rocket and missile attacks on Israel. And yesterday, the Israel Defense Forces conducted what it stated were limited incursions into southern Lebanon. UNIFIL peacekeepers remain in position and the UN flag continues to fly despite Israel's request to relocate. I reiterate our deep appreciation to the military and civilian members of our UN peacekeeping force, UNIFIL, and to troop contributing countries. The safety and security of all UN personnel must be ensured. Madam President, civilians are paying a terrible price, which I utterly condemn. Since last October, more than 1,700 people have been killed in Lebanon, including over 100 children and 194 women. Over 346,000 people are confirmed to have been displaced from their homes, and government estimates put this number as high as 1 million. Another 128,000 people, both Syrian and Lebanese, have crossed into Syria. The UN has mobilized all its capacities to provide urgent humanitarian aid in Lebanon, and I ask the international community to fully fund our appeal. Since October 8th, Hezbollah attacks on Israel have killed 49 people, with over 60,000 people displaced from their homes. It is absolutely essential to avoid an all-out war in Lebanon, which would have profound and devastating consequences. Madam President, yesterday, Iran launched approximately 200 ballistic missiles towards Israel. It stated it was in response to the killings of Hassan Nasrallah and the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps Commander Abbas Nilforushan last week, as well as that of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran in July. Millions of people across Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory were forced to seek shelter. One person was killed from the Iranian strikes, a Palestinian in the occupied West Bank. As I did in relation to the Iranian attack in April, and as should have been obvious yesterday in the context of the condemnation I expressed, I again strongly condemn yesterday's massive missile attack by Iran on Israel. And these attacks, paradoxically, do nothing to support the cause of the Palestinian people or reduce their suffering. Almost 1 year has passed since the atrocious 7 October acts of terror by Hamas and the taking of hostages. And since last October, Israel has conducted in Gaza the most deadly and destructive military campaign in my years as Secretary General. The suffering endured by the Palestinian people in Gaza is beyond imagination. At the same time, the situation in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, continues to deteriorate with Israeli military operations, construction of settlements, evictions, land grabs, and intensification of settler attacks, progressively undermining any possibility of a two-state solution. And simultaneously, armed Palestinian groups have also used violence. Hamas has continued to launch rockets, and just yesterday, 7 Israelis were killed in a terror attack in Jaffa. Madam President, the events of the past week, the past months, and indeed nearly the past year make it clear. It's high time for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, with the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, the effective delivery of humanitarian aid to Palestinians in Gaza, and irreversible progress to a two-state solution. It's high time for a cessation of hostilities in Lebanon, re-election towards full implementation of Security Council resolutions 1559 and 1701, paving the way for diplomatic efforts for sustainable peace. It's high time to stop the sickening cycle of escalation after escalation that is leading the people of the Middle East straight over the cliff. Each escalation has served as a pretext for the next. we must never lose sight of the tremendous toll this growing conflict is taking on civilians. And we cannot look away from systematic violations of international humanitarian law. This deadly cycle of tit-for-tat violence must stop. Time is running out, and I thank you.
Je remercie le secrétaire
I thank the
général de
Secretary
son
General
exposé
for his briefing.
et je donne maintenant la
I now
parole aux
give
membres du
the
Conseil
floor
qui
to
souhaitent
those
faire une
council members who
déclaration.
wish to make statements.
Je donne maintenant la
I give
parole au
the floor to
représentant
the
de la France.
representative of France.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam President,
je remercie le
I
secrétaire
would
général
like
des
to
Nations
thank the
Unies
Secretary General
pour
of the
son
United
intervention
Nations for his statement,
et je tiens à lui redire
and I would
le
like
plein
to state
soutien
once
et
again
toute la
that he has
confiance
the
de
full
la
support
France.
and trust of France.
La France condamne les attaques par
France
missiles
condemns
balistiques
the
perpétrées hier
ballistic
par
missile
l'Iran
attacks
contre
perpetrated
Israël.
yesterday by
Attachée à
Iran
la
against
sécurité
Israel.
d'Israël,
We are attached to
la
the
France a
security of
mobilisé
Israel,
ses
and
moyens
France has
militaires
mobilized
au
its military
Moyen-Orient
means in the
pour
Middle East
parer la menace
in order to
iranienne.
fend off the Iranian
Nous
threat.
appelons l'Iran
We
à
call upon
s'abstenir
Iran to
de toute
abstain
action
from any
susceptible
action
de conduire
that could
à une
lead to
déstabilisation
additional
supplémentaire et à
destabilization
un embrasement
and a
régional.
regional
Nous
conflagration.
condamnons aussi
We
l'attaque
also
terroriste
condemn
qui a
the
visé les
terrorist
civils à
attack
Jaffa.
that targeted
La
civilians
France
in
rappelle
Jaffa.
la
France
nécessité
would recall
de
the
mettre
need
fin
to put an
à
end
l'escalade
to
militaire dans la
military
région
escalation
qui
in
ne
the
fait
region,
qu'aggraver
which is only
l'instabilité
worsening
et accroître
instability and
l'insécurité
increasing
et dont les
insecurity.
populations civiles
And
sont
the
les
civilian
premières victimes.
populations are the first victims of this.
Au Liban, la situation
In
est
Lebanon,
grave.
the situation is
Les
serious.
opérations militaires
Military
s'intensifient.
operations are intensifying.
L'armée israélienne a
The
mené des
Israeli army
incursions
carried out
terrestres sur le territoire
land
libanais
incursions on
en
Lebanese
violation
territory
de la
in
souveraineté
violation of
libanaise
Lebanese
et
sovereignty,
le Hezbollah poursuit
and
ses attaques
Hezbollah
contre
is
Israël.
pursuing its attacks against Israel.
Comme l'a rappelé le ministre de l'Europe et
As
des Affaires
recalled by the
étrangères,
Minister for
Jean-Noël
Europe
Barrot, lors
and
de sa
Foreign Affairs
visite à
of
Beyrouth
France,
le 30
Jean-Noël Barrot,
septembre,
on his
la
visit to
France est
Beirut on the
opposée
30th of
à toute
September,
opération
France opposes
terrestre
any
israélienne au
Israeli
Liban
land operation
et
in
elle appelle
Lebanon,
à la
and
cessation
we
des
call
attaques
for a cessation
indiscriminées
of
contre les
indiscriminate
civils.
attacks against civilians.
La France condamne les frappes
France
aériennes israéliennes
condemns the
qui
Israeli
ont
air
provoqué
attacks
un
that
nombre
have led
considérable
to
de victimes
a
civiles,
considerable number of
ainsi
civilian
que les attaques
victims,
du
as
Hezbollah
well as
contre
the attacks
Israël
of
et sa
Hezbollah
population.
against Israel and its
Il
population.
faut un cessez-le-feu
We
au
need
plus vite
a
au
ceasefire
Liban.
as soon as possible
La
in
France
Lebanon.
appelle les parties à se
France urges
saisir
the
sans
parties
délai
to, without
de
delay,
l'appel
answer
et
the
des
call
propositions
to
du
consider the
président de la
proposals
République
of the
française
President of the
et
French
du
Republic
président des
and the
États-Unis
President of the United
avec le soutien
States,
de nos
with the
partenaires
support of our
en vue de
partners,
parvenir à
with
un
a view to
cessez-le-feu
bringing about a
ouvrant la
ceasefire,
voie à
opening
un
up
règlement
a pathway
diplomatique du
to a
conflit.
diplomatic
Il est impératif de
resolution of the
restaurer
conflict.
la
It is
souveraineté
important
et l'intégrité
that we
territoriale du
restore the
Liban.
sovereignty and territorial
Au sud
integrity of
Liban, le
Lebanon.
cadre est clair.
In South Lebanon, the
Il faut
situation
mettre
is
en œuvre
clear.
intégralement la résolution
There must be full
1701. Elle
implementation
est
of Resolution
reconnue tant par le
1701.
Liban
It
que
is
par
recognized by
Israël
Lebanon as
comme
well
le
as by
cadre
Israel
pour parvenir
as
à une
the framework
stabilité
to bring
durable
about
le long
lasting
de la ligne
stability
bleue
along the
et
blue line,
offrir des garanties de
and it
sécurité
offers
pour les deux
security
pays.
guarantees for both
Les
countries.
déplacés doivent pouvoir
Those that have
retourner
been
chez eux
displaced
en
must be
toute
able to return
sécurité
home in full
en
security
Israël
in
comme au
Israel
Liban.
as well as in Lebanon.
La France réaffirme son
France
engagement au sein de
reaffirms
la
its
cellule
commitment to
et elle salue
UNIFIL,
le
and
travail des
we
casques bleus.
salute the work
Avec
of the
près de
blue helmets of the
700
force.
soldats,
With
la France y prend
around
toute sa part.
700 soldiers,
Il faut que
France is
toutes les
doing its
parties au
part.
conflit
All the
garantissent la
parties to the
protection
conflict
des
must
casques bleus,
guarantee
c'est
the
une
protection of the
obligation
blue
qui s'impose à
helmets.
elles.
That is an
La
obligation
France
incumbent
rappelle
upon
également la
them.
nécessité
France
d'un
also
cessez-le-feu
recalls the need for
immédiat
an
et
immediate
durable à Gaza,
ceasefire and
permettant
lasting
un
ceasefire
accès
in Gaza,
humanitaire complet à la
making it possible
population,
for
la
there to be
libération
complete
immédiate de tous les
humanitarian
otages
access
et
to
la
the civilian
reprise des
population,
négociations
the
en
immediate
vue de
release of
mettre
all
en œuvre de
hostages,
façon
and a
effective la
resumption of
solution à deux États.
negotiations in order to effectively
Madame la
implement the
Présidente,
two-state
les
solution.
civils doivent toujours
Madam
et
President,
partout
civilians must always
être
and
protégés.
everywhere be protected.
La France rappelle
France would
l'impératif de
recall
respect du droit
the
international
imperative of
humanitaire.
respect for international
Il est
humanitarian
temps que le
law.
Conseil de
It is high
sécurité
time
fasse
for the
preuve
Security
d'unité
Council to
et
show
puisse d'une
unity
seule voix
and to speak with one
demander de
voice,
travailler à la désescalade dans la région.
demanding that
La
we
France
work
poursuit
towards
ses efforts
de-escalation
en
in
ce
the region.
sens en lien
France is
avec ses
pursuing its
partenaires.
efforts
Je vous
in this
remercie.
regard with our partners. I
Je
thank you.
remercie le représentant de
I
la
thank the
France
representative of France
et je
for their
donne maintenant
statement.
la
I now
parole à la
give the floor to
représentante
the
du Royaume-Uni.
representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And let me start by thanking the Secretary General for his briefing and reiterate our full and unequivocal support to him and to the UN as they seek to address this crisis. The events this week are gravely concerning. Yesterday, the Iranian regime launched over 200 ballistic missiles at Israel. we categorically condemn this act of aggression, which escalates an already dangerous situation. As my Prime Minister said yesterday, Israel has our full support in exercising its right to defend itself against Iranian aggression. President, we are deeply concerned about the prospect of further escalation in Lebanon and across the region. We have been clear. All our efforts now must be on stopping this cycle of violence. Iran and its allies across the region must exercise restraint and step away from the brink. We've been clear. My Foreign Secretary has consistently called for a ceasefire in Lebanon by Lebanese Hezbollah and Israel, and the implementation of a political plan in line with UNSCR 1701. We have been clear. In Gaza, we need an immediate ceasefire and the release of the hostages. My Foreign Secretary has urged both Israel and Hamas to agree the ceasefire deal on the table, to choose peace and bring this chaos to an end. Peace, not war, is the courageous option. It is also the best option to secure stability and security for Israelis, Palestinians, Lebanese, and the wider region. President, my Prime Minister has been working urgently to gather support for a political solution to this crisis. Only a ceasefire in Lebanon and Gaza would create the space to agree a political plan consistent with UNSCR 1701 that allows for the sustainable return of displaced Israeli and Lebanese civilians to their homes. Innocent civilians in Israel and in Lebanon have been displaced from their homes for too long already. The only way they will return is through a sustainable peace across the blue line. The conflict in Lebanon is causing devastating consequences for civilians, especially for women and children, and draws us closer to a wider regional conflict. President, we cannot let Lebanon become another Gaza. With mounting civilian casualties and hundreds of thousands of displaced people, all parties must do everything possible to protect civilians and fully respect international humanitarian law. A widening of the conflict is in no one's interest. The actions taken now will impact a generation. I call on all actors to step back from the brink and find a political resolution. I thank you.
Je remercie la représentante du
I thank the
Royaume-Uni et je passe
representative
maintenant
of the
la
United
parole à la
Kingdom. I now
représentante
give
de
the floor
Malte.
to the representative
Thank
of
you,
Malta.
President. And at the outset, allow me to congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Council and thank Slovenia for its leadership in steering our work in September. I also thank the Secretary General for his remarks. I reiterate our continued and unwavering support to him and thank him for his continued leadership and moral compass whilst guiding this organization through such difficult times. Malta echoes the Secretary General in condemning the continued and escalatory hostilities across the Middle East. This vicious cycle of violence, inevitably leading to a regional conflict, is extremely concerning. It must be brought to an end. Repeated strikes across Lebanon and Israel and Israeli operation across the Blue Line, continued rocket fire into Israel by Hezbollah, and the latest Iranian missile attacks on Israel, together with continued rhetoric and threats by relevant parties to continue escalating hostilities, are only paving the way towards a bleak and desolate future for the entire region. Amid the worst displacement crisis in the country's history, we are witnessing yet another man-made humanitarian catastrophe. We cannot be silent in light of this deterioration. Furthermore, we strongly condemn yesterday's missile attack on Iran by Israel. We call on Tehran to immediately halt such actions, which only contribute towards expanding a complex web of tensions and push the entire region closer to the precipice. We also condemn the terror attack in Jaffa yesterday, which killed 6 Israeli civilians and wounded 9 others. President, the Israeli-Hamas war, the resulting humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and situations elsewhere in the West Bank and East Jerusalem are the core of the explosive situation we now find ourselves in. These are the devastating consequences of unchecked conflicts. This human suffering is the high price that the people across the Middle East are paying on a daily basis. We stress that indiscriminate bombings, destruction of civilian infrastructure, and mass displacements are violations of international law. All parties must abide by their obligations under international humanitarian law and prioritize the protection of civilians. Furthermore, we emphasize once again that Security Council resolutions are legally binding. They must be respected and implemented. Along the blue line, it is only through the full implementation of Resolution 1701 that the displaced residents of Israel and Lebanon can be able to return to their homes in peace and security. Furthermore, Lebanon must be free of weapons held by militant groups outside the authority of the Lebanese state. We stress the need to establish an area free of armed weapons, other than those of the government of Lebanon and of UNIFIL, between the Blue Line and the Litani River. Violations of Lebanon's territorial integrity and sovereignty, including through Israeli airstrikes and overflights across Lebanon, must cease. A dramatic escalation in Lebanon will only move us further from this goal. In the current crisis, UNIFIL also assumes a fundamental stabilization role. The safety and security of UN peacekeepers is paramount. Also, as a troop-contributing country, we call on all parties to protect and support the important mission of UNIFIL. In Gaza, we reiterate our call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire, the safe return of hostages to Israel, and the full implementation of relevant Security Council resolutions. We continue to support all diplomatic initiatives aimed at de-escalation across the region, including the efforts of the members of this Council. In conclusion, President, the region is witnessing a descent into all-out war, despite months of warning. The narrative for war must end, and the narrative for peace must begin. More importantly, this Council must act in a united and decisive manner. Now is the time to speak with one voice and unequivocally call for an end to all hostilities. The people of the Middle East are waiting for us. The world is waiting for us. Thank you.
Je remercie la représentante de
I
Malte et
thank the
j'invite maintenant la
representative of Malta.
représentante
I
des
now
États-Unis à
invite
prendre la
the
parole.
representative of the United
Thank
States.
you, Madam
to take the floor.
President. We look forward to working closely with you during your presidency of the Council this month. I also want to thank Slovenia for your successful conclusion of your presidency during the month of September. I wish to thank Secretary General Guterres for his briefing today. Colleagues, yesterday, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, launched nearly 200 ballistic missiles at Israel. Tragically, there has been a confirmed death of a Palestinian civilian in the West Bank. Iran's stated intention was to avenge the deaths of 2 IRGC-supported terrorist leaders and an IRGC commander by inflicting significant damage and death in Israel. Thankfully, and through close coordination between the United States and Israel, Iran failed to achieve its objectives. This outcome does not diminish the fact that this attack, intended to cause significant death and destruction, marked a significant escalation by Iran. It does not negate the need for immediate Council action. This is a moment for this Council to speak out with one voice and condemn Iran for its unprovoked attack against another member state, and equally important to impose serious consequences on the IRGC for its actions. Colleagues, in a broad sense, Iran was complicit in the October 7th attacks on Israel through its funding, training, capabilities, and support for the military wing of Hamas. And after Hamas's horrific attack carried out nearly a year ago today, the United States sent a clear message to Iran. Don't exploit the situation in ways that would risk propelling the region into a broader war. The IRGC flagrantly and repeatedly ignored this warning by encouraging and enabling the Houthis in Yemen to disrupt global shipping and launch attacks against Israel, by supporting militant groups in Syria and Iraq, which repeatedly attacked American forces engaged in the fight against ISIS, and by arming and encouraging Hezbollah after its former leader, Nasrallah, made the decision on October 7th to open a northern front against Israel. There can be no doubt Iranian support to regional proxies has directly contributed to the crisis in Gaza and Lebanon. At the center of Iran's efforts since October 7th to sow chaos and threaten regional stability is the IRGC, which has repeatedly flouted and violated this Council's resolutions. I can't believe I have to say this, but I will, because the IRGC and its allies are out there peddling propaganda. The decision to launch nearly 200 ballistic missiles at Israel was not in any way defensive. The IRGC was not protecting Iran from threats from another member state. Instead, the IRGC was acting in solidarity with Hezbollah after the killing of Nasrallah, who led a terrorist group that has the blood of thousands of Americans, Lebanese, and Israelis on its hands. I can think of no starker example of state support of terrorism than launching ballistic missiles to avenge the death of a terrorist leader. It is indefensible and it is unacceptable. And we have a collective responsibility as members of the Security Council to impose additional sanctions on the IRGC for supporting terrorism and for flaunting so many of this Council's resolutions. If this Council sits on its hands, what message will that send? I fear that silence and inaction will only invite the IRGC to repeat attacks like what we saw yesterday and on April 13th of this year, again and again and again. Colleagues, we meet at a moment when there is a heightened risk of countries in the region being dragged into a broader conflict. This includes Lebanon. The intensified fighting over the last week has displaced nearly 1 million people, and we mourn the many civilians who've been killed. We also recognize that for nearly a year, Israel has repeatedly called for the full implementation of Resolution 1701, even as Hezbollah's attacks along the Israeli-Lebanese border have displaced Lebanese people. And even as Hezbollah has blocked Lebanon's government from exercising full sovereignty on its side of the blue line, it is significant that even in the aftermath of recent events, Israel is still calling for the full implementation of Resolution 1701. Achieving this outcome through the hard work of diplomacy remains the United States' urgent priority. We strongly believe that a diplomatic solution along the blue line, consistent with Resolution 1701, offers the only path to durably de-escalate tensions and allow Israeli and Lebanese citizens to return to their homes with safety and security. As we pursue this diplomatic solution, we reiterate our call on all parties to protect civilians. We also underscore our support for UNIFIL and emphasized that all parties must ensure UNIFIL personnel remain secure. Colleagues, we are also committed to doing everything possible to end the war in Gaza, where Palestinian civilians have been caught in the crosshairs of war, where dire humanitarian crisis persists. That's why we're working to bring about a ceasefire deal with release of hostages, consistent with Resolution 2735. The events of the past week should send an unambiguous message to Hamas's leadership, which continues to cower in tunnels beneath Gaza. Hezbollah and Iran will not rescue you. The only path forward is a ceasefire agreement. We must double down on diplomatic solutions that would ensure the safety of people across the region. As we do, there should be no doubt. The United States will continue to support Israel's right to defend itself against Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and any other Iranian-supported terrorists. Of course, how Israel defends itself matters. We continue to make clear that measures must be taken to minimize civilian harm. Colleagues, as President Biden emphasized following yesterday's attack, the United States is fully supportive of Israel. Our actions have been defensive in nature. Let me be clear. The Iranian regime will be held responsible for its actions, and we strongly warn against Iran or its proxies taking actions against the United States or for their actions against Israel. Colleagues, this moment of great risk is a test of this council. It is imperative that we unequivocally condemn Iran's attack and demand that it cease its support for terrorism in the region. People in Israel, in Gaza, and the West Bank, in Lebanon, and across the region deserve a durable peace. And it is far past time for this council to hold Iran accountable for fanning the flames of war. Thank you, Madam President.
Je remercie la représentante des
I
États-Unis
thank the
et je donne
representative
la
of the
parole maintenant
United
au
States. I now give the
représentant
floor to the
de la
representative
République
of
de
the
Corée.
Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to thank Slovenia for their able leadership as President of the Council during the month of September. Let me also take this opportunity to congratulate you, Madam President, for assuming the presidency for October. I express my deep gratitude to the Secretary General for his briefing today and his tireless efforts for peace in the Middle East. This is a moment of reckoning for the Security Council. Resolution 1701 has been violated by all parties on the ground. A broader regional war with the potential to devastate not just Lebanon and the region, but far beyond, is dangerously knocking on our door. Our repeated calls for urgent restraint have been ignored. Both the regional stability and the credibility of this council are now in jeopardy. Let there be no misunderstanding. It was Hamas' brutal attacks in broad daylight that set this escalation in motion. However, neither October 7th nor the ensuing response give any actor the right to violate the international norms and institutions that the United Nations and the global community have built over decades, including international humanitarian law, Security Council resolutions, and the sovereignty and territorial integrity stipulated under the UN Charter. The Security Council, which bears the primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security, must unite and act. This is not like any other situation. This conflict has the potential to broaden and deepen, involving many countries without clear limitations in geography, and with far-reaching implications on international politics, economics, and even humanity as a whole. This demands more than passive condemnation. The Security Council must do something significant now to prevent the situation from plunging deeper into the abyss. The very raison d'etre of the Security Council is at stake here. Indeed, now is the time for the Security Council to draw a firm line in the sand. No actor should be given a green light of impunity or a blank check to operate far beyond the rule of law. We cannot afford to be paralyzed by frustration or helplessness. Colleagues, let me conclude by fully echoing the statement made by the Secretary General yesterday. And I quote, "I condemn the broadening of the Middle East conflict with escalation after escalation. This must stop. We absolutely need a ceasefire," unquote. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de la
I thank
République de
the
Corée et
representative of the
j'invite la
Republic of
représentante de
Korea,
Slovénie
and I
à
now
prendre la parole.
invite the
Thank
representative
you,
of
Madam
Slovenia
President.
to take the
First,
floor.
allow me, on behalf of Ambassador Boger and our entire team, to thank you sincerely and other members for your kind words, and also to wish to congratulate you and your team for assuming the presidency of the Council for October. Wish you all the best. We thank the Secretary General for his briefing. Madam President, in the last 2 weeks, we have met several times to discuss the situation in the Middle East. It has become increasingly clear that the current escalation is gaining its own, even more dangerous momentum. The actions and reactions of actors involved are dragging the region further away from peace and closer to an all-out war. No single party can absolve itself of blame for the chaos that is unfolding. This has become a crisis of retaliation and vengeance, where each strike fuels the next. Let me be clear, the region needs full and immediate de-escalation. For this to happen, a ceasefire on all fronts is urgent. We condemn the recent escalation in the Middle East. This includes Iranian attack on Israel. It includes Israeli attacks on Lebanon and the escalation between Hezbollah and Israel. We call on Israel to revoke the ground operation in southern Lebanon. It also includes continuous Israeli military operation in Gaza, and it includes yesterday's terror attack in Jaffa. We see deeply troublesome parallels. Escalation from any side only leads to further violence, not security or peace. We want to underline more violence cannot bring more stability and security in the region or beyond. War is not a solution to the problems in the Middle East. There is no military solution to the crisis. We call on all countries and actors to show restraint, and to everyone with influence must exert it. To Israel, Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and others, the circle of violence must stop. Retaliations must stop. Escalations must stop. We call on all parties to respect international law, particularly international humanitarian human rights law. Respect for and compliance with international law are a must. Protection of civilians must be ensured at all times, and we are dismayed by the impact of the escalation in Lebanon on civilians and condemn the high number of civilian casualties. Massive displacement in Lebanon will add an additional strain on a country which is already facing numerous challenges. Equally, this intensification of the conflict will not bring thousands of displaced Israelis back to their homes. And we must not forget about the entire population of Gaza being displaced repeatedly. There is a dire need to recommit and fully implement Resolution 1701. This Council must stand united in its call for de-escalation and ceasefire. We repeat our call for safety and security of UNIFIL to be ensured at all times. We also take this opportunity to express our full support to the work of the United Nations and the Secretary General in this crisis. We appeal to Israel to reconsider today's announcement. It is high time to strengthen the role of diplomacy and to prioritize peace. We support all initiatives which could bring stability about peace. Ceasefire negotiations related to Lebanon and to Gaza are utmost needed. We underline this Council has primary responsibility for maintenance of international peace and security. The region is standing at a precipice. We are a step away from an all-out war that threatens not only the region, but global peace and stability. In the complex history of the Middle East, the Council has made various attempts to shoulder its responsibility. It is now on us, these 15 countries sitting by this table, to unite and call out for an all-out ceasefire. I thank you, Madam President.
Je remercie la représentante de
I thank the
Slovénie et j'invite
representative
le
of
représentant
Slovenia. I
d'Algérie
now
à prendre
invite
la
the
parole.
representative of Algeria to take the floor.
Madam President, I would like to commend Slovenia for their remarkable presidency of the Council during last month. And I also congratulate Switzerland for assuming the presidency for this month and assure them of Algeria's full support. I extend my sincere gratitude to Mr. Antonio Guterres for his comprehensive briefing. And I express Algeria's full solidarity, admiration, and support for the Secretary General following the incredible decision of the Israeli occupying authorities to declare him persona non grata. This decision reflects a clear disdain of the UN system and the entire international community. For the Israeli authorities, no narrative, no truth exists except their own. Madam President, this meeting marks the third time in a single week that we have heard from the Secretary General regarding the Middle East. It is a testimony of the gravity of the situation. We stand perilously close to a regional conflagration, with tensions escalating daily. The situation has further deteriorated due to the Israeli aggression against Lebanon, beginning with the targeting of civilian electronic devices and progressing to indiscriminate bombardment and ground invasion that shows a blatant disregard for human life, a flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. Following the attacks detonating civilian electronic devices, the Security Council convened at Algeria's request. We endeavored to have the Council send and clear a simple message, a call for immediate desescalation, a call for immediate desescalation. Regrettably, the Council failed in this attempt. Madam President, the Security Council's inability to act has exacted a devastating bill, a devastating toll. Between September 17 and 25th, the Israeli militaries claimed more than 1,000 lives in Lebanon. 1,000 lives in Lebanon, including 87 children and 156 women, while displacing 1 million of Lebanese in the country's largest exodus. Our inaction has effectively granted Israel under the right of self-defense principle. Our inaction has effectively granted Israel carte blanche to continue its rampage in Gaza, in West Bank, carte blanche to escalate against Lebanon and pursue the bloody agenda of death and destruction. Now we hear the new rhetoric of desescalation through escalation. Strange. This is a dangerous fallacy. Escalation inevitably breeds further escalation for years to come. This surge in violence has derailed efforts to implement Resolution 2735 and has severely compromised any prospect for calm in Lebanon and the wider region. The Security Council must act with greater resolve to be relevant, simply to be credible. As the highest authority responsible for maintaining international peace and security, it is unacceptable for its decision, including Resolution 2735, to be blatantly disregarded. Israel is not above the law, and we must hold it accountable. We need solutions, tangible, enforceable solutions. No more rhetorics that serves no one. Madam President, while we must not allow the escalation in Lebanon to overshadow the ongoing tragedy in Gaza, it seems some have grown indifferent of Gaza's people plight. Any effort to address the broader escalation in the region must begin with halting the brutal assault in Gaza. I repeat, any effort to address the broader escalation in the region must begin with halting the brutal assault in Gaza. We need an immediate ceasefire. We need an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Everyone, save for the Israeli occupier, seeks this end, this cycle of violence, and is working toward that end. So how long will the international community remain impotent in the face of Israel's defiance? How long will we fail to enforce full implementation of Resolution 1701, especially Israel's withdrawal from Lebanese territory, a key condition for Lebanon's stability? Madam President, the Middle East urgently requires concerted actions from all of us, to find lasting, sustainable solution to its crisis. These solutions demand an end to Israeli occupation of Arab lands in Lebanon, in Syria, and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with Al-Quds Sharif as its capital. I thank you, Madam President.
Je remercie le représentant
I
d'Algérie
thank
et
the
je passe la
representative
parole
of
au
Algeria.
représentant du
I now give the
Mozambique.
floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Madam President, allow me first to congratulate Switzerland on assuming the presidency of the Security Council in this very challenging month of October. We pledge our full support. We also thank Slovenia for its successful presidency in the month of September. We are grateful to His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, for his insights on this deeply concerning matter. Madam President, the Middle East remains a region of intense and complex geopolitical dynamics, shaped by historical legacies, power struggles, and intricate relationship among various states and non-state actors, significantly shaping the region's landscape. The Palestine question, a central and profoundly impactful issue, continues to influence diplomatic relations and strategic interests, not only within the region, but also globally. The ongoing conflict and the quest for a two-state solution continue to be pivotal in discussion about peace and stability in the Middle East. Amidst the ongoing Israel strikes in Gaza, Beirut, and beyond, Iran has recently launched ballistic missiles into Israel, marking a sharp escalation in regional tensions. This action is reportedly in retaliation for the recent killing of Hezbollah and Hamas leaders by Israel airstrikes. These military acts further exacerbate the prevailing regional tensions and may indeed trigger more conflicts involving other countries with potentially unthinkable implications. In this context, we recall that during the 79th General Assembly debate, world leaders expressed deep concern over the escalating conflict in Gaza and its potential spillover to Lebanon. Both the UN Secretary General and the President of the General Assembly urged Israel to cease hostilities and pursue a diplomatic resolution to prevent Lebanon from becoming another conflict zone like Gaza. Madam President, precisely 6 months ago in this chamber, we raised serious concerns that ongoing retaliatory attacks between Israel and Iran could significantly escalate regional tensions and potentially lead to a full-blown conflict between Israel and Iran. Regrettably, this is now fast becoming a sad reality. These retaliatory attacks are shaping the foreign policies and security strategies of regional states and their external allies. While recognizing the right of states to self-defense as enshrined in the UN Charter, we express our deep concern on the recent Iranian strikes. In light of the prevailing situation, it is imperative that all parties involved, including Israel and Iran, strictly adhere to international legal norms to prevent further military confrontation and maintain regional stability. All involved parties need to exercise restraint and approach the situation with wisdom and prudence. The Council must continue to closely monitor the situation and take appropriate action to deter additional threats while safeguarding international peace and security. Furthermore, the Council must actively engage all concerned parties to prevent any miscalculations that could lead to broader conflict in an already volatile region. Such escalation would have devastating consequences for civilians who are already suffering in the occupied Palestinian territory, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Israel, and the broader Middle East. Indeed, we should not forget the human cost of this deepening conflict. The prevailing situation is a matter of great concern and demands our profound reflection and immediate action, as it represents one of the most severe humanitarian crises of our time. With each escalation, the conflict generates more casualties, displacement, and destruction of infrastructure, exacerbating the unimaginable human tragedy in the war conflict zones. Seeking a sustainable solution in the Middle East region is of paramount importance. Stability in the Middle East is vital for the security and development of all the states in the region, including Iran and Israel. We therefore reiterate our consistent appeal to the Council members to redouble their efforts and influence towards this noble goal in full compliance with all relevant international norms, including resolution, decisions, and other instruments of the United Nations. Let us strive for peace, understanding, and cooperation in the Middle East, mindful of the fact that acknowledging the legitimate concerns of all involved parties is a crucial step towards fostering stability, harmony in diversity. I thank you, Madam President.
Je remercie le représentant du
I thank
Mozambique
the
et je donne
representative
la
of
parole à la
Mozambique, and I
représentante
give
du
the floor to
Guyana.
the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Madam President, and allow me to congratulate Switzerland on the assumption of the presidency and to thank Slovenia for their successful presidency. I also thank Secretary General for his sobering briefing on the urgent and rapidly deteriorating situation in the Middle East, including Lebanon, and express Guyana's full support to him, including for his untiring efforts. Madam President, the situation in the Middle East is barreling towards a greater catastrophe. Israel continues to expand its military operations to Lebanon while continuing its intense offensive in Gaza. And we are now witnessing a dangerous escalation of attacks between Israel and Iran. Amidst the deadly tit-for-tat, tensions continue to ratchet up on multiple fronts, and the entire region ticks as a virtual time bomb before our very eyes. Guyana urges all parties to step back and to immediately end all hostilities. This Council must act as one, on the side of peace and respect for international law and the United Nations Charter. We must work to de-escalate the situation, and civilians must be protected on all fronts at all times. Madam President, when we met last week to discuss Lebanon, it was clear to every member of this Council that disastrous consequences could ensue from a wider armed conflict in that country. Today, we are meeting amidst reports of ground incursions by Israel into the sovereign territory of Lebanon in violation of the UN Charter and Resolution 1701, and following aerial bombardments from southern Lebanon to the heart of Beirut, resulting in more than 1,000 deaths in the past 2 weeks alone, not to mention the thousands injured and displaced. Guyana calls on Israel to uphold their obligations under the UN Charter and the wider body of international law, including international humanitarian law. Madam President, the people of Lebanon should be spared from the throes of a war neither of their making nor choosing, even as the country continues to grapple with difficult economic and political circumstances. This Council must act in the interest of international peace and security to prevent further tragedy in Lebanon, Gaza, and throughout the Middle East. Allow me to conclude with 3 urgent appeals. First, Guyana reiterates its call to all parties to immediately cease the hostilities and to abide by their obligations under international humanitarian law, in particular, the protection of civilians. We must intensify our efforts for a ceasefire in Gaza, in Lebanon, and every other front of operations. This Council must use all of its available tools to contribute to a diplomatic solution and to the full implementation of Resolution 1701, which provides a clear path for resolving this conflict in a manner that ensures that peace and security can be enjoyed by the people of both Lebanon and Israel. Second, we appeal to all parties to guarantee the safety and security of all UN and humanitarian personnel, including those attached to UNIFIL. As is the case with all UN personnel, UNIFIL has operated under extremely difficult circumstances over the past year and is undoubtedly being placed in a position of much greater risk as hostilities heightened in their area of operations. We must work to ensure that conditions remain conducive for the exercise by UNIFIL of its important mandate. Third, Guyana appeals for a renewed investment in peace over aggression. Let us enable the former at the expense of the latter, as we strive to save the present generation from the continuing scourge of war. As Council members, let us act together in favor of the millions of civilians who are paying the heaviest price in these senseless wars. Justice and peace demand that we do no less. I thank you.
Je remercie la représentante
I
du
thank the
Guyana et
representative of
j'invite le
Guyana,
représentant du
and I
Japon à
invite the
prendre la parole.
representative of Japan to take the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, let me express our gratitude to Slovenia for their successful presidency in September, and congratulate Madam President on your assumption of the presidency for October, and we express our full support to your presidency. I also would like to thank Secretary General for his sobering and important briefing today. Since last October, the world has witnessed an unconscionable spiral of violence in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, and beyond. The recent developments in Lebanon are particularly worrying. We are seriously concerned about the ground operation conducted by Israel Defense Forces in Lebanon. We cannot tolerate any further escalation. In this vein, Japan once again calls for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. All parties need to demonstrate their recommitment to the full implementation of relevant UN Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 1701. Japan pays respect to the UN staff and personnel on the ground, devoting the high cause under the severe circumstances. Their security must be ensured. Now, we are seeing the growing needs of the civilians in Lebanon who are facing the onset of a displacement crisis. Thus, Japan reiterates its call on all parties to immediately take all measures to prevent any further civilian casualties and adhere to international law, including international humanitarian law, to prioritize the protection of civilians and ensure humanitarian access. Madam President, the escalation in Lebanon will drag the Middle East into a wider conflict, as was seen yesterday. Japan is deeply concerned about the attacks conducted by Iran using ballistic missiles against Israel. These attacks further deteriorate the current situation in the Middle East. We strongly condemn such an escalation. Secretary General issued a statement that condemned the broadening of the Middle East conflict, and we reiterate his call for immediate ceasefire. In April, when this council was convened following Iran's large-scale attack against Israel, many of us stand that it constitutes an unprecedented development. However, we have seen what was unprecedented occurring twice within the last 6 months. This clearly shows The Middle East is following a dangerous path that could lead to a catastrophe. We must not let this happen. In this regard, Japan amplified our call to all parties to exercise maximum restraint, work towards de-escalation, protect civilians, and work through dialogue and diplomacy towards peace. Neither the region nor the world can afford any more conflicts. Thank you, Madam President.
Je remercie le représentant du
I thank
Japon
the
et
representative
j'invite le
of Japan
représentant
and
de
I
la
invite
Fédération
the
de Russie à prendre
representative
la
of the
parole.
Russian Federation to take the
Госпожа
floor.
председатель,
Madam President,
хотим
we
поздравить
would like
Словению
to
с завершением
congratulate Slovenia
председательства в
with
Совете в
the
сентябре,
successful
объективно непростом месяце для любого
conclusion of the
председательства.
presidency in
И поздравить
September,
Швейцарию
which
с
was
вступлением в
not
должность
an
председателя
easy
Совета
month.
ВКБ.
And we'd like to congratulate Switzerland with assuming the
Благодарим
presidency.
генерального
We
секретаря
thank the
за
Secretary
его
General
оценку
for his
ситуации
assessment
на
of the
Ближнем
situation
Востоке,
in the
резко
Middle East,
обострившейся
which has
на
become
фоне
severely
беспрецедентного витка
exacerbated by
эскалации насилия
an
в Ливане
unprecedented spiral of
и
violence in
расширения
Lebanon
географии
and the
конфронтации на
broadening
соседей
of
по региону.
confrontation to neighbors in the region.
Приняли также во
We
внимание
also
позиции Израиля и Ирана,
took
изложенные в
account of the
распространенных
positions
накануне
by
письмах.
Israel and Iran contained in the letters
К
disseminated
сожалению, Ближневосточный
yesterday.
регион
Unfortunately,
буквально на
the
наших
Middle Eastern
глазах
region, in
скатывается в
front of our
пучину
eyes,
новой
is
большой войны,
sliding towards a new large-scale war,
а Совет
whereas
Безопасности
the
лишь
Security
беспомощно
Council is
наблюдает.
just there helplessly watching it.
Израильская
The
бесчеловечная военная
Israeli
операция в Газе
brutal military
продолжается,
operation
несмотря на
Gaza
требования
continues
подавляющей
despite the
части международного
demand on the
сообщества
part of
ее
the
остановить.
overwhelming part of the international community to stop it.
Раскручивание
The
спирали насилия
spiraling
предсказуемо
of
привело к обострению
violence
ситуации в
predictably
ливано-израильском
led to a
приграничье,
worsening
Йемене и
situation
акватории
on the border
Красного моря.
between Israel, Lebanon, and Yemen, and in the Red Sea.
Однако вместо
But
того, чтобы
instead
задействовать
of
возможности
using
дипломатии, власти Западного
diplomacy,
Иерусалима
the
сделали
West Jerusalem
однозначную ставку
authorities
на силовое
unambiguously
оккупирование своих
staked
обычаев.
everything on using force.
А их американские
Their
подельники
American
во всем им
accomplices
подыгрывают,
are
парализуя
playing
работу
completely into
Совета
their
Безопасности.
hands. They are paralyzing the deliberations of Security Council.
В итоге новой
As a
жертвой
result,
израильской военной
the
машины
new
стал
victim
Ливан.
of the Israeli military
После
machine is
интенсивных
Lebanon.
обстрелов
After
ливанских
intensive
городов
shelling
южный
of
сосед
Lebanese
приступил к наземной
towns,
операции
the
в этом
southern
районе.
neighbor started a ground operation in
Кроме того,
Lebanon.
после серии
Furthermore,
политических
after a series of
ликвидаций,
political
включая убийство
killings,
главы
including
Исполсовета
the
Хамас
killing
Хании,
of the
генерального
Hamas
секретаря
chair of the
Хезболлы
political bureau
Насраллы и
Hani, the
ряда
general
других
secretary of
лидеров
Hezbollah Nasrallah, and
противостоящих
other
Израилю движений,
leaders of resistant movements,
в конфронтацию включился и Иран,
Iran came into the confrontation.
целых 2 месяца
Iran, who for
проявлявший
2 whole
исключительную в
months
данных
had been
обстоятельствах
showing
сдержанность.
exceptional, under the circumstances, restraint.
Из выступлений наших
From
западных
the
коллег
statements made by our
складывается
Western
впечатление,
colleagues, we
что
drew the
единственная
conclusion
проблема,
that the
которая
only issue
стоит
that
перед Советом
the
сегодня,
Security Council
это ответ на
has in
ракетный
front of it
удар Ирана.
is a response to a missile strike by
Сложно
Iran.
представить,
It's difficult to imagine
на какую роль в дипломатическом процессе
what
с подобной оценкой
of
ситуации можно рассчитывать.
role the diplomatic process would play when the situation
Как
is
будто
viewed
все
this
это
way.
случилось в вакууме.
And it is presented as though all of this happened in a
Как будто
vacuum,
ничего не
as though
происходит и не
nothing
происходило
is
в Ливане,
happening and
в
nothing
Газе,
did
в
happen in
Сирии,
Lebanon,
в
in
Йемене,
Gaza, in Syria, in
что и
Yemen.
привело к новому,
But it did happen, and
опаснейшему
it led
витку
to a new, very
разрастающегося
dangerous
ближневосточного конфликта.
spiral of a widening Middle East conflict.
Россия решительно
Russia
осуждает нападение на
resolutely
Ливан и
condemns
призывает
the attack
израильские власти
on Lebanon and
незамедлительно
calls on
прекратить
Israeli
силовые
authorities to
действия и
immediately
вывести
stop
войска
using
с
force and
ливанской территории.
withdraw their troops from the Lebanese territory.
Не видим никаких
There is
оправданий
no
для новых жертв со
justification
стороны
for
гражданского
fresh civilian
населения, еще
victims amongst the
которых идет
civilians,
уже
and their
тысячи.
number is already in the thousands.
Выражаем
We express
солидарность
our
с руководством
solidarity
и
with the
народом
leadership
дружественного
and the
Ливана,
people of the friendly
подвергшегося
country of
вооруженной
Lebanon
агрессии.
who are
Искренне соболезную
undergoing an
родным и
armed
близким
aggression,
погибшим.
and we will send our heartfelt
Требуем
condolences to the
полного и
families of
комплексного
those
выполнения
who died.
резолюции Совета Безопасности
We
17
demand a full comprehensive implementation of Resolution 1701. It contains the obligations on Israel to end all their offensive military operations, to withdraw their military from southern Lebanon, and end the occupation of Lebanese territories, as well as obligations on Hezbollah to withdraw the units north of the Litani River.
Израильская сторона
The
должна
Israeli side
неукоснительно
has
обеспечить
to
безопасность
ensure
временных сил ООН в
rigorously
Ливане,
the safety of the
подвергающихся
interim forces in
непредсказуемым
Lebanon,
рискам в
who
связи с
are
израильским
undergoing
вторжением.
unpredictable risks because of the
Напоминаем о
Israeli
том,
incursion.
что угроза
We'd
жизни
like
и
to
здоровья
recall that
голубых
the
касок
threats
может
to the
представлять
health
собой
and
военный преступление.
life of blue helmets could amount to a war crime.
We also decisively condemn the killing of Nasrallah. We reject the fact that in order to eliminate him, a residential quarter in Lebanon's capital had 80 bombs weighing 1 ton dropped on it. As a result, 6 high-rise buildings were destroyed. How can you call this a discriminatory selective action here? This political elimination is fraught with catastrophic consequences for Lebanon and the Middle East as a whole. Western Jerusalem, I'm sure, understood that, but they intentionally decided to go ahead and do this. And this way, this means that the Israeli side shoulders the full responsibility for the subsequent escalation and its consequences, including the consequences for the people of Israel. Within the framework of its mandate to maintain international peace and security, the Security Council has to make Israel immediately end the hostilities. And we all have the duty to make every effort to create the conditions for the political and diplomatic settlement. In this context, we note the signals sent by Tehran that do not wish to see a further spiral of confrontation. Madam President, the Security Council in the recent days is being frequently and seemingly correctly criticized because of its inability to end violence in the area of Israeli-Palestinian conflict. At the same time, those who follow our work knows very well that 14 out of 15 members of the Security Council have already would have undertaken the measures to compel parties to peace, would have saved this way the lives of thousands innocent women, children, and the elderly. And Israel would not have been able to act as brazenly and with such disregard to international law if they didn't feel themselves under an unequivocal and all-around protection by the United States. For their ally, the Middle East, Washington has already used the veto on Security Council 5, and since the beginning of June has intentionally been trying to pull the wool over our eyes, advertising their so-called Biden plan and its quiet diplomacy to arrive at a deal between Hamas and Israel. To be perfectly honest with you, we are left with the impression by all of this that these mediated negotiations are something that Washington is conducting with itself. And it is very symbolic here, therefore, that the approval to eliminate Hezbollah and start a very dangerous spiral of regional escalation was given by the Israeli Prime Minister from New York after he delivered an openly militaristic statement in the General Assembly. This is the kind of a well-tuned duet, distinguished colleagues, we have to deal with. And the question, of course, is not in the moral and political support, but also it has to do with the multi-billion supplies of weapons that Washington continues supplying to Israel, despite the fact that it's used to annihilate 42,000 Palestinians. Israel, which of course doesn't need any kind of mediation, and continues its brutal campaign. As a result of this, the flame of this conflict is growing wider and wider, and it's bringing in newer and newer neighbors of Israel in the region. The dangerous illusion here is that this flame will leave Israel unscathed. This flame has already consumed the lives of remaining Israeli hostages, whereas Western Jerusalem is pretending that all of this is part of their plan, and at the same time showing complete disregard to the public opinion in Israel itself. Madam President, another dangerous illusion is that Israel, having a considerable military supremacy, plans to deal with the crises they provoked on themselves. It is becoming increasingly clear that the plans of the Israeli leadership is to pay any price so as to trigger a conflict between their main regional adversary, Iran, and the United States. It's difficult to say whether Washington understands this, but so far this show has been going on following the Israeli script. And if it reaches its finale, the conflict can reach an unimaginable level of escalation and will threaten not just the Middle East, but the entire world. We are convinced that it is in our interest to prevent such a scenario. We would like to believe that our American colleagues will also finally see the light and will fully realize their responsibility they shoulder as permanent members of the Security Council. Madam President, the only way out of the situation in the Middle East we see as using all of the vast toolkits the Security Council has. This toolkit allows us to effectively achieve an end of conflicts and ensuring that Security Council resolutions are implemented. Any other initiatives will just be a mitigating stopgap and will not be effective. We see no alternative to making parties to the conflict to immediately have a ceasefire in Gaza, which is to be accompanied by an exchange of hostages and prisoners and organizing a full and unimpeded humanitarian access in the Strip. This can help set the foundation for the relaunching of a peace settlement of the Palestinian issues on the international basis, which is itself based on the principle of two states, and this is something that we have always spoken in favor of. The second area for efforts is also obvious. It's an immediate ceasefire on the south of Lebanon and a general rejection by any direct or indirect participants in the conflict from using force provocations and hateful rhetoric. Madam President, today's news that the Secretary General is a persona non grata in Israel is unheard of and is a slap not just on the UN but on all of us. We call on the members of the Security Council and the UN to react to this outrageous act. And I repeat once again, in order to deal with all of these issues, we at the Security Council have the tools. What it's at issue here is having the political will. We have the will. Do you? We urge you all to answer this question as soon as possible. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de la Fédération
I
de
thank the
Russie et je passe la
representative of the
parole
Russian
au
Federation and I
représentant de
give
la
the floor
Sierra
to the
Leone.
representative of Sierra Leone.
Madam President, the Security Council has been convened in the most difficult of circumstances concerning the Middle East. Allow me, however, to congratulate you and Switzerland on assuming the presidency of the Council and assure you of Sierra Leone's fullest support and cooperation. Similarly, we congratulate and commend Slovenia on their efficient and excellent stewardship of the Council in the critical month of September. I also thank His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, for his important briefing on a tragically escalating situation. Mr. Secretary General, be assured of Sierra Leone's fullest support always. Madam President, colleagues, Sierra Leone is gravely concerned about the dangerous cycle of escalation in the Middle East, characterized by spiraling tit-for-tat, ping-pong retaliatory attacks, not in conformity with the United Nations Charter, including the application of its Article 51, that can only lead to a mutually assured destruction if there is no immediate de-escalation. Despite the resonance and resolute call for ceasefire by our leaders in the general debate of the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly, and repeated calls by members of this Council for ceasefire and restraint, it must be clear to all that we now have a regional conflict with multiple fronts in Gaza and violence in the West Bank, in Lebanon, where its sovereignty and territorial integrity is being violated, retaliatory attacks between Israel and Iran, as well as with the Houthis in Yemen. Since the 7th October 2023 heinous attacks led by Hamas on Israeli civilians, which we have condemned as acts of terror, we are gravely concerned about the escalation of violence that has ensued. In Gaza, the response by Israel has been characterized by collective punishment, widespread bombardment, and alarming disregard for international humanitarian law, leading to immense civilian suffering and the destruction of critical civilian infrastructure. Only hours ago, it has been reported that 50 people were killed in southern Gaza, only a few hours ago. Gaza cannot be forgotten, as the rate and pace of killings have not subsided, with over 41,000 people killed, and the Security Council Resolution 2735 all but forgotten. The protection of civilians must remain our top priority. Sierra Leone is deeply disturbed by reports of disproportionate military responses, the targeting of civilian infrastructure, and the collective punishment of the population in Gaza. We urge all parties to respect the principles of distinction, proportionality, and necessity as enshrined in international humanitarian law. There can be no justification for the deliberate targeting of civilians or the destruction of civilian infrastructure that people rely for their survival. We continue to call for unhindered humanitarian access to Gaza. The blockade and siege has left civilians in desperate need of food, water, medical supplies, and basic services. Humanitarian access, safety, and aid must be allowed to flow to those who are suffering. Madam President, recent events, including strikes in Lebanon, the killing of a Hezbollah leader, and the reported land incursion by Israel, are deeply concerning. These developments have heightened the risk of regional destabilization, and we call on all actors to show restraint, avoid further escalation, and recommit to dialogue and compliance with Security Council Resolution 1701. We urge the parties to comply with their obligations regarding UNIFIL and the protection of UN peacekeepers and UN premises. It is clear that today, Israel and Hezbollah are at war. Sierra Leone has been concerned about the repeated exchanges of fire across the blue line since Hezbollah launched rockets into Israel on 8 October 2023, unprovoked. While the exchanges of fire were largely confined to the immediate vicinity of the blue line for a short period, we observed the gradual intensification along and increasing well beyond the blue line, causing civilian casualties and infrastructure damage, destruction of farmlands, and displacement of tens of thousands of civilians. Members of this council, including Sierra Leone, have been expressing the risk of the danger of miscalculation, a wider and devastating regional conflagration as a consequence of the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Today, Middle East is at war. We note the declaration of Israel to return displaced residents and further declaration of Hezbollah on a ceasefire in Gaza. We express deep concerns over the dangerous rhetoric relating to the achievement of respective military objectives by the conflicting parties. In this regard, Sierra Leone reiterated military action is not the best course of action to achieve the stated objectives of the parties. Sierra Leone therefore calls on the parties to use diplomatic channels, including United Nations good offices, to avoid further escalation and risking a war that will include actors outside of the region. This council must now stand united in calling for full implementation of all relevant Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 1701 and 1559. All sides must agree to a ceasefire as a precursor to the resettlement of displaced residents in the south of Lebanon and in the north of Israel peacefully. Madam President, a letter dated 1st October 2024 from the permanent representative of Iran to the United Nations addressed to the President of the Security Council confirms what we all witness as reported by global news media, to the effect that, and I quote, the armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran carried out a series of missile attacks against the military and security target of, end of quote, the State of Israel. The leadership of Israel has vowed to further retaliate. Sierra Leone condemns all attacks that violate international law and the UN Charter, including, as aforesaid, the blatant misapplication of Article 51. We join the UN Secretary General in condemning, and I quote, the broadening of the Middle East conflict with escalation after escalation. This must stop. We absolutely need a ceasefire, end of quote. The path to peace cannot be paved with violence. A sustainable solution can only be achieved through genuine dialogue and diplomacy, addressing the legitimate rights and concerns of the conflicting parties, most particularly the aspirations of both the Palestinian and Israeli people. This includes the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and the right of Israel to security within its recognized borders. In conclusion, Madam President, Sri Lanka continues to call for the parties to consider the global implications of their actions and to recommit to a cessation of hostilities. We urge the Security Council, our council, to act decisively to halt the violence, enforce a ceasefire, the release of hostages and prisoners, facilitation of access to humanitarian aid, ensure accountability, and work towards a just and lasting solution that respects the rights of all peoples. Let us end the occupation of Palestine, as the International Court of Justice has called for, implement the two-state solution, and choose a future of peace, stability, and dignity for both Palestine and Israel. Sri Lanka stands firm in its commitment to peace, justice, and international law. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de la Sierra Leone
I
et
thank the
j'invite le
representative of
représentant de la
Sierra
Chine
Leone
à
and
prendre
I
la
invite the
parole.
representative of China to take the floor.
President, I congratulate Switzerland on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for this month, and I thank Slovenia for its work as the presidency of last month. I thank France for requesting this emergency meeting. I also thank Secretary General Guterres for his briefing. On this occasion, I would like to reiterate China's resolute support for the SG for his work and oppose the groundless accusations of Israel against him. President, over the past 2 weeks, the situation in the Middle East, in particular in Lebanon, has taken a sharp turn for the worse. Following the remotely operated and simultaneous detonation of thousands of communications devices in Lebanon, Israel carried out several rounds of large-scale airstrikes in southern and eastern Lebanon. Yesterday, Israel launched ground offensive and military incursion into Lebanon. Israel also launched intensive airstrikes against Syria. Iran has also concluded a series of military attacks on the military and security targets in Israel and sent correspondence to the Security Council explaining its position. China is deeply concerned and extremely worried about the current grave situation and the prospect for further developments. We call for effective respect for the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of all states. We reiterate our opposition to all acts that violate the basic norms of international relations and condemn all violence and attacks against civilians. We share the position of the United Nations that any Israeli crossing into Lebanon violates the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon and contravenes the provisions of the Security Council Resolution 1701. Since last October, the cycle of violent conflict has been repeating itself in the Middle East. Israel, in total disregard for the call of the international community for an immediate ceasefire, single-mindedly advances its military operations, resulting in the projection and expansion of the conflict. At present, an all-out war is on the verge of breaking out. At this critical juncture, any inflammatory statements and provocative actions are extremely dangerous and could easily lead to miscalculations and chain reactions, escalate the situation, or even make it completely out of control. We urge all parties, in particular Israel, to exercise restraint and refrain from any action that could lead to further escalation of the situation. President, the conflict has caused an unprecedented humanitarian disaster. As we have seen, Gaza has become an inferno on earth, while in Lebanon, there has been a great deal of destruction of civilian facilities. Thousands of casualties and more than 1 million people displaced from their homes, including a large number of Palestinian refugees. We call on all parties to the conflict to respect the red lines of international humanitarian law and to protect civilians. We support the efforts of the UN humanitarian system to take urgent action to ease the humanitarian situation in Palestine and Lebanon. China reiterates the importance of respecting the neutrality of UNIFIL and of effectively ensuring the safety and security of the peacekeepers. United Nations assets and personnel should not be the target of armed attacks. President, the Security Council bears an important responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. Under the current circumstances, the Council must act urgently and be united in making demands clearly and unequivocally that an immediate ceasefire must be established in Gaza. The de-escalation of the violence must be stopped, and the de-escalation of the Lebanese and Israeli situation must be advanced. The cycle of violence must be halted. Every effort must be made to prevent the spread of the fighting, and the parties concerned must be pushed to return to the track of political and diplomatic solutions. Any rhetorics that appease and allow further military adventurism will send out wrong signals and may cause serious consequences. We hope that major countries with important influence will adopt a sincere and responsible attitude and earnestly play a more constructive role and avoid further turmoil of the situation. I thank you, President.
Je remercie le représentant de la Chine.
I thank the representative of China and I give the floor to the representative of Ecuador. Thank you, Madam President. Allow me first and foremost to congratulate your delegation on assuming the presidency of the Council for this month, and I reiterate the full support of my country. We'd also like to thank Slovenia for the excellent presidency of the Council last month. I'd like to stress and reiterate the support of my country to the work of the Secretary General for peace and our support for all UN agencies in that regard. So thank you, Madam President, and I'd like to thank France for having requested this emergency meeting so that the Council can consider the worsening situation in Lebanon and Israel, recent developments that have placed the Middle East in an extremely vulnerable situation. Thank you, Secretary General, for the sobering information that you have provided us with and your call to the international community to mobilize the more than $400 million in humanitarian assistance that Lebanon requires at this time, and above all, for your permanent commitment to a de-escalation of the conflict and a ceasefire. We should begin by recalling that we are just 5 days away from the anniversary of the terrorist attacks by Hamas, which have no justification and must be condemned, that gave rise to the current spiral of violence that we're seeing in the region. The Palestinian cause cannot be used by Hezbollah and other extremist groups to try to, in vain, explain their acts of terrorism, such as the killing of children while they were playing football in Mahd al-Shams last July. Ecuador recognizes the eminent right to self-defense of member states of the United Nations in case of an armed attack in terms outlined in Article 51 of the Charter. We must put an end to the escalation of violence that has been described, which includes air bombings and incursions, the launching of rockets, ballistic missiles, acts of terrorism that continue to expose innocent civilians to loss of life and limb. In Gaza, we've seen tens of thousands of civilian deaths, including women and children. The states involved, international humanitarian law must be respected. Humanitarian workers must be able to fulfill their work and their lives must be respected. The states involved and regional organizations and the international community as a whole must deploy all diplomatic and political strategies possible to bring about a cessation of hostilities. This responsibility is greater for those that have a greater degree of influence over the parties to the conflict. Now is the time to take specific decisions aimed at achieving agreements that will lead to a lasting and sustainable peace. Resolution 1701, 1559, 2722, and 2735 of the Security Council must be complied with without delay, since non-compliance constitutes a violation of international law. We must avoid another humanitarian disaster, leaving those who desire more violence without any excuse. Madam President, colleagues, Ortega and Gasset said it is false to say that in life circumstances decide. On the contrary, circumstances are the dilemma in the face of which we must make decisions. Who takes the decision is our character. Neither our collective responsibility in the Council nor peace, which constitutes a high value of humanity, can be subordinated to geopolitical tensions and interests. In conclusion, I reiterate that Ecuador supports all initiatives which have as their goal the restoration of peace and the sustainability of that peace. Thank
Merci
you.
le représentant de l'Équateur et je vais faire maintenant une déclaration en ma qualité de représentant de la Suisse. Nous remercions le secrétaire général de son intervention. La Suisse est préoccupée au plus haut point face au développement, au dernier développement au Moyen-Orient. Le risque d'une guerre régionale dont nous mettons en garde depuis maintenant presque un an est sur le point de devenir réalité. En vue des innombrables vies civiles en danger, il est impératif que tous les acteurs dans la région cessent immédiatement leurs hostilités pour permettre une désescalade et que ce Conseil assume pleinement son rôle. L'intensification des hostilités entre Israël et le Hezbollah, y compris les informations faisant état d'incursions terrestres israéliennes, tout comme les tirs d'environ 200 000 missiles balistiques par l'Iran sur le territoire israélien, sont inacceptables. Il en va de même pour les offensives menées par les Houthis et d'autres groupes armés dans la région. Toutes ces attaques doivent immédiatement cesser. La Suisse condamne la spirale de violence de ces dernières semaines. Elle met en danger la vie des civils dans toute la région. Les victimes civiles se comptent en dizaines de milliers, dont d'innombrables enfants. Plusieurs millions sont déplacés de force en raison des hostilités. La population civile paye ainsi le prix lourd de cette escalade militaire au Liban, dans tout le territoire palestinien occupé et en Israël. Le dialogue est le seul moyen pour éviter une guerre régionale. La Suisse soutient tous les efforts en vue de solutions diplomatiques pouvant mener à un arrêt immédiat des violences dans toute la région. Toutes les parties et ceux qui ont une influence sur elles doivent maintenant faire preuve d'un maximum de retenue. La Suisse appelle toutes les parties à agir dans les limites imposées par le droit international, y compris la Charte des Nations Unies. La souveraineté et l'intégrité territoriale de tous les pays dans la région doivent être respectées. De plus, la volonté de ce Conseil est claire. Toutes ces résolutions doivent être mises en œuvre. Cela concerne les résolutions exigeant un cessez-le-feu à Gaza et demandant la libération immédiate et inconditionnelle des otages. Cela vaut également pour celles sur la sécurité maritime en mer Rouge. De même, nous appelons encore une fois avec insistance un retour à la cessation des hostilités de part et d'autre de la ligne bleue, ainsi qu'un réengagement immédiat quant à la mise en œuvre de la résolution 1701. Cette résolution est reconnue par tous. Elle dresse un chemin pour résoudre les causes sous-jacentes du conflit et permettre aux populations au Liban et en Israël de vivre en paix et sécurité. Le droit international humanitaire doit impérativement être respecté par toutes les parties en toutes circonstances et indépendamment de la question de la licéité du recours à la force. Cela comprend le strict respect des principes relatifs à la conduite des hostilités, tels que la distinction entre civils et combattants, la proportionnalité et la précaution dans l'attaque. La Suisse condamne toutes les violations du droit international ayant eu lieu ces derniers jours, y compris les attaques balistiques d'hier de l'Iran sur Israël. La Suisse condamne également toutes les violations du droit international humanitaire et de toute violence contre les civils, comme les
violence against civilians, such as yesterday's act of terror in Jaffa and the increasing attacks by settlers in the West Bank. Secretary General, Switzerland reiterates its support for the UN's commitment and good office in the region. This applies in particular to UNIFIL and UNSCOL. UNIFIL, to which Switzerland contributes through UNSCO, is currently working in an extremely dangerous environment so as to reduce tensions and ensure liaison between the parties. Switzerland also reiterates its full support for the work of the Secretary General. In addition, the UN, in collaboration with other organizations, is currently providing humanitarian aid to all civilians in need. We reiterate our call for the protection of UN personnel, in particular humanitarian and peacekeeping personnel. There is an urgent need to put an end to the suffering of the civilian population and to re-establish dialogue in order to bring peace to the region. The responsibility of a Security Council, united in its action for peace, is clear. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council.
Et je donne maintenant la
I now give
parole
the floor
au représentant
to the representative
sous article 37.
Under Rule 37.
Et j'invite donc le Liban à prendre la parole.
And I invite Lebanon to take the floor.
السيدة الرئيسة أهنئكم بداية على ترأسكم لمجلس الأمن لهذا الشهر كما أشكر سلوفينيا على رئاستها للمجلس الشهر الماضي وأتقدم بالشكر من فرنسا على طلب عقد هذه الجلسة الطارئة كما أشكر الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة السيد أنطونيو غوتيريش على إحاطته وندائه وكل الدعم له ولما يقوم به. السيد الرئيس نجتمع اليوم في مجلسكم الكريم ومنطقة الشرق الأوسط مشتعلة من كل حد وصوب فلا لبنان بخير ولا غزة بخير والحشود الإسرائيلية العسكرية وأرتال الدبابات والمصفحات على طول الحدود الجنوبية للبنان والحكومة الإسرائيلية والكابينت المنبثقة عنها أقرت الاجتياح البري للبنان الذي بدأت طلائعه ليلة أمس ويأتي ذلك بعد 11 شهرا من العدوان البربري الهمجي الذي لم يوفر لا مدنيين ولا أعيان مدنية ولا عاملي إغاثة ولا صحفيين ولا أطفال ولا نساء ولا مسنين فمنذ 8 من تشرين الأول 2023 قتلت إسرائيل وجرحت آلاف الأشخاص بانتهاك صارخ لميثاق الأمم المتحدة والقانون الدولي والقانون الدولي الإنساني ولكل الأعراف الدولية والمبادئ الإنسانية. لذلك كل ما تقوله إسرائيل عن عمليات عسكرية جراحية ومحدودة هو غير صحيح. فالأضرار هائلة في صفوف المدنيين وفي البنى التحتية المدنية. وما حصل في قرية عين الدلب خير دليل على ذلك فقد استهدفت غارة إسرائيلية بتاريخ 29 أيلول مبنى سكنيا متسببة بمجزرة أدت إلى سقوط 71 ضحية بينهم عشرات النساء والأطفال دفنوا في مقبرة جماعية وتعيد هذه المأساة ذكرى المجازر الإسرائيلية السابقة خلال اجتياحاتها واعتداءاتها على لبنان وخاصة مجزرتي قانا في العام 96 و2000 مؤكدة مرة بعد مرة تجاهلها للمطلق للقانون الدولي بالرغم من مناشدة أعضاء المجلس عامة وسويسرا خاصة مرارا وتكرارا لها بالامتثال لموجباتها المنصوص عليها في القانون الدولي الإنساني. السيد الرئيس لم يعد للكلام من معنى ولا للشكاوى من فائدة فكم من مرة جئناكم إلى هذا المجلس وحذرنا من الوضع الكارثي على طول الحدود الجنوبية وكم من مرة ذكرنا ناقوس الخطر محذرين من تمدد الحرب لتصبح إقليمية تشمل العديد من الجبهات لكن ما يحدث اليوم
What is happening today, this unprecedented level of killing, displacement, and destruction, this can no longer be tolerated or ignored. The policy of putting our heads in the sand and facing a confrontation with Israel is no longer useful. The children of the south and the southern suburb of Beirut are sleeping on the streets. Mothers are carrying their children, fleeing the horrors of the destructive strikes and missiles used against civilians. Israel has intensified its aggression and its crimes against Lebanon and its capital Beirut. In one day alone, on the 23rd of September, Israel, through its aerial bombardments, killed 569 people, including 50 children and 94 women. They've also assassinated the Secretary General of Hezbollah, His Eminence Mr. Hassan Nasrallah, on the 27th of September. Across history, there was never consensus for a standard description for any military, political, or revolutionary individual, and history is rich with examples of these individuals. Your council here today is divided over a correct description. However, there is consensus among everyone that confronting an occupying force is resistance. Madam President, as we have said time and again, and as His Excellency the Prime Minister has said in his statement before this council last week, and as the Foreign Minister of Lebanon has repeated once and again, the people of Lebanon and the government of Lebanon reject the war. They want the implementation of Resolution 1701 with all its provisions. They want to deploy the Lebanese army in the south along our ground borders with the support of UNIFIL. This is the only solution for this blind war and this barbaric aggression. We have expressed our willingness to strengthen the presence of the army in the south, and the government has announced that it has opened the door for the enlistment of 1,500 new soldiers to comply with the implementation of Resolution 1701. In this regard, I recall that Lebanon has agreed to the French-American initiative that Israel has also initially agreed to, but then rejected this initiative, even annihilated it with a wave of killing and destruction that has been unprecedented in scale and violence. We also reaffirm the official position as stated by the Prime Minister yesterday. We remain committed to the call issued by the American and French presidents, supported by a number of friendly and sisterly countries. We pledge to implement all the points of the declaration, including an immediate ceasefire, to start to look into the implementation of Resolution 1701 fully. We welcome the call and we pledge to implement it immediately. And upon a ceasefire, we are prepared to deploy the Lebanese army to the area south of the Litani River so that it can carry out its function fully in coordination with UNIFIL in the south. Madam President, today we are moving further and further towards an open, unrestricted regional war. The solution is to go back to political solutions based on relevant resolutions of international legitimacy. This situation will not be resolved until the full implementation of Resolution 1701. And if we only focus on imposing military solutions instead of diplomatic solutions, furthermore, the situation in Palestine will not be resolved and will only escalate, and the waves of killing and destruction will continue unless resolutions of the United Nations are implemented, particularly resolutions 2735, 242, 338 on the two-state solutions and the establishment of the Palestinian state. The Security Council must shoulder its responsibility to prevent an implosion in the Middle East and to help us exit this dark tunnel. Lebanon today is facing an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. Lebanon needs urgent humanitarian assistance. It is
التي
the
تستضيف
only state
مليوني نازح
that
سوري
hosts
ونصف
2 million
مليون لاجئ
Syrian
سوري
IDPs,
وفي نفس الوقت
500,000
لديها حوالي
Palestinian
مليون
refugees,
نازح
and we
لبناني
also
داخلها
have around 1
وهذه
million
سابقة يصعب
Lebanese
تكرارها
IDPs. This is an
وكنا قد
unusual
نبهنا
precedent.
من خطر
We
النزوح
have
واللجوء
warned before
وها قد
of the
وصلنا
risk
اليوم
of
إلى
displacement,
كارثة
and
إنسانية
today we
مع
are
مليون
before
نازح
a
داخل
humanitarian
منهم
crisis
الآلاف
with 1
على
million
الطرقات
IDPs, with
دون
thousands of
مأكل
them
أو
on the
مشرب
streets,
أو دواء
without food, without
من هنا
water,
وجوب
without medication.
المساعدة لمواجهة
Therefore,
هذه
we are
الكارثة
requiring assistance to
وقد
confront
تم
this
إطلاق يوم
catastrophe.
أمس بالتعاون مع
Yesterday,
الأمم
in
المتحدة
cooperation with the United
نداء
Nations,
عاجلا
we
بقيمة
launched an urgent appeal
426 مليون
for
دولار
426
للاستجابة
million
لهذه
US dollars
الكارثة
to
الإنسانية
respond to this humanitarian
لذلك
crisis.
نتقدم بالشكر
We would like
من
to
كل
thank
من ساهم في
all
المساعدة
those who
من دول
contributed to
صديقة
the aid
وشقيقة
efforts
ومن وكالات الأمم
from
المتحدة
friendly and sisterly
وندعو جميع
countries,
الجهات
from UN
الفاعلة
agencies, and
والدول
we
إلى
call on
المشاركة في
all
المساعدة.
stakeholders and all countries
السيدة
to
الرئيسة
contribute as well.
تاريخنا مع
Madam
إسرائيل
President,
تخلله
our
اجتياحات
history with
متعددة
Israel has been
أعوام
permeated with many
78
invasions
82
in
و2006
1978, 1982,
وكل
and
هذه
2006.
الاجتياحات
And all these
والاحتلالات
invasions, all
التي
these
نجم عنها
occupations that
تدمير
resulted
كبير
in great
وقتل لآلاف
devastation, the killing
المدنيين
of thousands of
انتهت
civilians,
جميعها
they all
باندحار
ended with
إسرائيل
the defeat and
وانسحابها
withdrawal
وتراجعها
of Israel.
والاجتياح اليوم
Today's
سوف
invasion
تكون نتيجته
will
هي
have the same result,
هزيمة أخرى
another
تضاف
defeat
إلى سجل
to be
إسرائيل مع
added to
لبنان
the record of Israel with
فأرض
Lebanon.
الجنوب تعرف
The land
أبنائها
of the south
وأهلنا في
recognizes
الجنوب
its citizens,
متجذرين في
and
أرضهم
our citizens in
وشجرة
the south are
الزيتون
rooted in
التي
their land.
أحرقتموها بالفوسفور الأبيض
The olive
سوف
tree
تنبت
that you burned with your
وتزهر
white phosphorus
وتثمر من
will
جديد
grow, will blossom,
وهذه
and bear
الأرض
fruit once
الطاهرة
again.
سوف
And this
تلفظ كل
consecrated land
محتل
will
مهما
reject
طال
any
زمن احتلاله.
for
السيد
however long
الرئيس
it takes.
لبنان اليوم
Madam
عالق
President,
بين مطرقة
Lebanon
آلة
today
التدمير
is stuck
الإسرائيلية
between
وبين
the
طموحات
Israeli
البعض في
destruction
المنطقة
machine and the ambitions of
واللبنانيون
others in the
يرفضون
region.
هذه المعادلة
The
القاتلة
Lebanese people rejects this
ولبنان
fatal
يستحق
formula.
الحياة
Lebanon deserves life.
لبنان يستحق
Lebanon
الحياة
deserves life.
نعم
Yes,
لبنان
Lebanon
واللبنانيون
and the Lebanese
يستحقون الحياة
people deserve life. I
وشكرا
thank you.
السيد الرئيس.
Je remercie le représentant
I
du
thank the
Liban.
representative of Lebanon,
Je passe maintenant la
and I
parole
now
au
give the floor to
représentant
the
d'Israël.
representative of Israel.
Thank you, Madam President. Last night, the Iranian regime launched a cold-blooded attack against 10 million civilians, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, men, women, and children of every faith. In an unprecedented act of aggression, Iran fired almost 200 ballistic missiles, forcing millions of people into bomb shelters. These scenes have not been witnessed since the Blitz in London. This was a deliberate attempt to strike at the very heart of our society, targeting the most sacred places in Israel, holy sites, mosques, synagogues, and churches. To Iran, there is no holy ground, no purity of life worth protecting. But even before the missiles rained down, the bloodshed had already begun. Just minutes before this assault, Palestinian terrorists opened fire on civilians, murdering 7 innocent people, young women, mothers protecting their babies, tourists. This is the reality we face every single day. Terror at our borders, missiles overhead, bullets in our streets. The Council must understand the situation Israel is forced to live in. We are under attack. This was not just an escalation. It was a direct assault on our very existence. The world watched silently as Iran funded and directed attacks against us for the past year, arming and training their proxies for decades, and the international community sat quiet. The silence, the routine call for de-escalation, only emboldened Iran. The result, last night's onslaught. Now the world must step up. Iran must pay a heavy price for this attack. Anything less is complicity. Do not be fooled by the fact that Israeli air defenses performed near miracles last night, saving countless lives beyond imagination. We also appreciate our partners for their assistance in defending against Iran's attack. Iran's failure does not diminish the evil behind their actions, the intentions. What we witnessed was nothing short of pure, unrestrained evil. This is the largest missile assault in Israel's history. They have openly launched hundreds of missiles into civilian areas. Today, the mask is off, and their evil is now laid bare for all the world to see. The Ayatollah's regime has revealed its true nature, not just as the world's greatest sponsor of terror, but as an active, direct aggressor. For years, Iran has armed terrorists and tyrannical regimes. We all know their weapons are responsible for the deaths of countless innocent civilians all across the globe, from Europe's war zones to terror attacks in the Middle East, from embassies in Latin America to assaults on US personnel. There is no corner of the world where Iran's blood-stained fingerprints cannot be found. They are not just Israel's enemy, they are an enemy of all civilized nations, an enemy to their own people who they brutally oppress, and an enemy to all nations they work to destabilize. Until now, they had largely operated in the shadows, using all their proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. They carried out their dirty work. But last night, that mask was ripped away, the mask that their leaders wear in these very halls. Iran no longer hides behind others. They have proudly stepped into the open as the architects of chaos and destruction. And now the world can see their true face. Iran launched the largest ballistic missile attack in history, justifying it as a vengeance for the elimination of Hassan Nasrallah. That is the reason. In doing so, they relinquished any deniability and claimed full ownership over Hezbollah's actions. They say that. That is the reason for the attack, because of Nasrallah. So basically, they own the deeds of Hezbollah today. Let me remind you all. Allow me to remind you of some of Hezbollah's crimes against the world. In 1983, they bombed the United States barracks in Beirut, murdering 241 US servicemen. That same year, they bombed the US embassy in Beirut, murdering 63. In 1992, they bombed the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, killing 29 people and wounding 242. 2 years later, same place, Buenos Aires, they bombed the Jewish Community Center, murdering 85 and injuring over 300. Before 9/11, Hezbollah were responsible for more American deaths than any other terrorist organization. None of this even mentions the thousands of Lebanese people and Syrians that they brutally murdered at the altar of their tyrannical masters. In the past year alone, since October 8th, Hezbollah has launched over 9,000 missiles and rockets, over 1,000 anti-tank missiles and hundreds of attack drones. They have made over 70,000 Israeli civilians refugees in their own country. All the while, they have been attempting to infiltrate our communities to commit an October 7th-style massacre. Behind every murder, every rocket launch, every plot stands the Iranian regime. Let me be clear. Israel will defend itself. We will act. And let me assure you, the consequences Iran will face for their actions will be far greater than they could ever have imagined. Let me ask the Council and the entire world, how would any of you react if faced with such an attack? What would any nation do if hundreds of ballistic missiles were raining down on your civilians, your cities, your places of worship? The scale of this attack is unimaginable, and yet Iran is determined to escalate further. This is not just a threat to Israel, this is a threat to the entire world. We will defend our people, and our response will be swift and decisive. Those who attack us will face serious consequences. For every missile fired, we will respond with strength. For weeks, I have sat in this council warning of the growing threat Iran poses, urging you to take decisive action against this regime. I warned that Iran's desire for dominance would not stop at Israel's border, but the inaction of this council has emboldened them. And now the missiles falling on Israel are the direct result of that failure to act. The time for complacency is over. The Iranian regime has shed all deniability. They are no longer silent puppet masters. They are bloodthirsty aggressors, reveling in their violence and destruction. The world cannot afford to ignore this reality any longer. We demand immediate, crippling sanctions on Iran. The IRGC must be designated as the terrorist organization it is. Do not let yourselves be fooled by moderate Iranian president. I saw the way they were received here last week. The meetings, the clapping. Iran's policy is dictated by its supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. And under his rule, the regime has grown more aggressive and murderous than ever. Iran's true face is one of terror, death, and chaos. They do not care about life, they do not respect their own religion, and they have targeted their fellow Muslims without hesitation. The time for empty calls for de-escalation is over. How can you do that? To equate Israel, a nation simply wishing to live in peace, acting in defense of its people, with an aggressor bent on our destruction is not just wrong. It is a grotesque and immoral distortion of reality. This is not a conflict between two equal sides. This is a battle between a sovereign country defending its right to exist and a regime that seeks nothing less than our extinction. And I repeat what I said last time. We have no border with Iran. We have no dispute with them. Ask yourself why they spend so much money and energy to build those rockets and to attack us. What is the reason behind it? Calls for de-escalation is a false symmetry, an absurd equivalence between the protector and the destroyer. Tonight actually, the Jewish people will welcome the new year. The past year has been the most challenging in our country's history, but we will prevail. In this coming year, we will not stop until all 101 hostages are back at their families' tables. Let the world understand, Israel will defend itself, and we will do so with justice and strength. Thank you, Madam President.
Je remercie le représentant d'Israël et je passe la parole au représentant de la République islamique d'Iran.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, we congratulate you, Madam President, for assuming the presidency of the Security Council this month, and thank you for the convening this emergency meeting to address the ongoing Israeli aggression against Lebanon and critical situation in the region. We acknowledge Slovenia for its successful conclusion of the presidency in September. Madam President, distinguished delegates, for a year now, the apartheid and occupying regime of Israel has continued its brutality in occupied Palestine with full impunity. And now this regime is extending its brutal, aggressive war to Lebanon and targeting innocent people day and night across the border and deep inside the territory. The regime is pushing the region to the edge of an all-out unprecedented catastrophe. Israel has no intention to pursue peace or a ceasefire. Regrettably, the UN Security Council has remained paralyzed due to the United States' obstruction of any effective decision by this body. Unwavering support provided by the United States, United Kingdom, and certain Western states to Israel has given a carte blanche to this aggressive terrorist regime for all sorts of sinister behavior. No more than ever, this regime has become a serious threat to international peace and security. The only way to prevent further escalation is clear. Israel must immediately cease its war on Gaza and its attacks on Lebanon must stop. Madam President, distinguished delegates, as we informed the members of the Council in our letter yesterday, the armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran launched a series of missile strikes targeting the military and security positions of the Israeli regime. Iran's action was in full accordance with the inherent right to self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter and a direct response to the regime's repeated acts of aggression against Iran, including the violation of Iran's sovereignty and territorial integrity during the past months. Our invocation of the right of self-defense followed by an extended period of restraint reflects Iran's responsible approach to regional and international peace and security at a time when the illegal action and genocide carried out by this occupying apartheid regime against the Palestinian people, as well as its repeated military aggression against Lebanon and Syria, continue. Iran's missile strikes were a necessary and proportionate response to Israeli continued terrorist aggressive acts over the past 2 months. This includes the violation of Iran's sovereignty, the assassination of political leader of Hamas in Tehran and Iranian citizens, the targeting and wandering Iran's ambassador to Lebanon, and the recent assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of the resistance and Secretary General of Hezbollah, and General Abbas Nil Furushan, an Iranian military advisor in Beirut. I wish to mention the key facts that clearly demonstrate Iran's action under self-defense is fully justified, lawful, and firmly grounded in international legal principles. On 1st April 2024, Israel presently attacked Iran's diplomatic mission in Damascus, Syria, in a blatant violation of international law, specifically the principle of inviolability of diplomatic and consular premises. Iran immediately sought the Council's condemnation. What was this body's response? Nothing. Rather than condemning Israel's act of aggression, the Council merely called for Iran's restraint and even refrained from issuing a press statement proposed by Russia. After 10 days of silence from the Security Council, Iran has no choice but to use its inherent right under international law to respond to this severe violation. On 31st July 2024, Israel committed yet another act of aggression by assassination Mr. Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas political leader and the former Prime Minister of Palestine, while he was an official guest of the Iranian government in Tehran. This was a flagrant breach of Iran's national sovereignty and territorial integrity. Despite Iran's call for action, the Council again failed to act. Meanwhile, several states, including the United States, urged Iran to maintain restraint, citing ongoing ceasefire negotiations. We respected these calls for diplomacy, yet no ceasefire materialized and Israel only grew bolder. Again, we witnessed another heinous crime by Israel, this time through the detonation of communication devices targeting the innocent people of Lebanon. A larger number of innocent civilians were killed and injured, including Iran's ambassador to Lebanon. This was yet another manifestation of state terrorism. Following, Israel carried out a blatant act of terrorist aggression using US-supplied thousands-pound bunker busters to assassinate Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, and a symbol of resistance against Israeli occupation and aggression in Lebanon. This brutal attack resulted in the martyrdom of numerous innocent people, including Hezbollah leader and Iranian General Abbas Nilfroushan, while also leaving many civilians wounded. This egregious act underscores once more the regime's continued reliance on violence and terror. Madam President, the Islamic Republic of Iran has consistently pursued peace and stability for the region and called for an immediate ceasefire and the cessation of civilians' casualties, a position we have maintained for over a year. Yet, experience has proven that Israel only understands the language of force. Diplomacy has repeatedly failed, as Israel views restraint not as a gesture of goodwill, but as a weakness to exploit. Each act of restraint taken by Iran has only emboldened Israel to commit even greater crimes and more acts of aggression. Consequently, Iran's response was necessary to restore balance and deterrence. Israel must understand that each act of aggression it makes is not unpunished and will be met with consequences. This is the cost this regime must bear. Contrary to the regime which consistently considers innocent civilians and civilian infrastructure as legitimate target for aggression and massacre, Iran's response has only targeted the regime's military and security installation with its defensive missile strike, because the Islamic Republic of Iran is grounded in ethical principles and noble teaching of Islam and full compliance with the principles of distinction under international humanitarian law. Madam President, distinguished delegates, the international community cannot afford to remain silent. We reiterate our call on this Council to respond with urgency and determination. The Security Council must intervene to stop Israeli continued aggression and war crimes against Lebanon, Gaza, and Syria, and to prevent the situation from escalating into a full-scale regional war. Furthermore, the Security Council must force Israel to comply with its obligation on the resolution this body adopted. Israel must fully implement Resolution 1701. Finally, Madam President, we strongly warn against any further act of aggression by Israeli terrorist regime against our national security and vital interests. Iran is fully prepared to take further defensive measures if necessary to protect its legitimate interests and defend its territorial integrity and sovereignty against any act of military aggressions and the illegal use of force. In this regard, Iran will have no hesitation. In conclusion, the regime of the United States and the United Kingdom regime, notorious enablers of the Israeli regime, along with France, have once again cynically attempted to justify Israeli heinous crimes under the guise of self-defense, shifting the blame onto Iran. While the Israeli regime must be held accountable for the atrocity crimes and cannot disregard the U.S. complicity in Israel's crimes. Israel's warmongering relies on U.S. regime, military support, and political backing. American weapons constitute the major part of Israeli weaponry and ammunition used in Gaza, and therefore the United States is implicated in every aspect of Israel's atrocity. The vast majority of aid. The U.S. regime even provides Israel with jet fuel. The U.S. has sent so many arms to Israel since October 7 that the Pentagon has struggled to find sufficient cargo aircraft to deliver the materials. If there were even a shred of honesty in their concerns for the loss of innocent people lives in Gaza or Lebanon, or for the spread of war across the region, they could easily strip Israel of the tools it used to commit those atrocities, yet their actions reveal their true intent. to embolden Israel's criminal actions. Thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de la République islamique d'Iran et j'invite le représentant de l'Irak à prendre la parole.
شكرا جزيلا السيدة الرئيس.
Thank you, Madam President. Allow me to congratulate Switzerland on assuming the presidency of the Council this month. I wish you all success. I also thank Slovenia for its efforts as President of the Council in September. I thank France for calling for this meeting. I would also like to express my deepest gratitude to Mr. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, for his briefing. We highly value his position and his calls for a ceasefire. Madam President, holding meeting after meeting at the Security Council over the past year without achieving any tangible results to stop continued Israeli attacks against the Palestinian people reflect a painful reality. The reality that the Security Council is not making any effective or resolute decisions to stop these violations that allow the occupation to perpetuate its practices and escalate violence in the region. It is time for the Security Council to play an effective role to maintain international peace and security, especially as Israeli attacks against Palestinian and Lebanese territories persist. The Security Council must bear its primary responsibility of maintaining international peace and security according to the Charter of the United Nations. The Security Council must adopt binding resolutions to ensure an immediate ceasefire, as it did in other conflicts around the world. Failure by Security Council to play its role and to fulfill its responsibility to maintain international peace and security opens the door to Israel to persist in its violations without any real deterrent. This leads to more instability and jeopardizes regional and international peace. The international community and the Security Council in particular needs to re-evaluate its policies towards this conflict. It must take tangible steps to end the occupation and ensure the protection of civilians. Continued violations, the aggression, military expansions, all these actions by Israeli occupation forces without any deterrent pushes the region towards a wide regional confrontation which jeopardizes regional security, causes significant human suffering, spreads extremism and terrorism, and further complicates the situation. Failure to put an end to these crimes emboldens Israel to go even further with its violations. It emboldens it to launch military attacks. This situation not only aggravates the suffering of the Palestinian and Lebanese people, it also jeopardizes stability and security in the region as a whole. In the absence of any deterrent, the conflict gets worse, and the risk of the region being dragged into a dangerous and widespread conflict increases due to the absence of decisive international intervention. The conflict has expanded to include Lebanon, which might lead to an all-out war in the region. Madam President, the accumulation of practices by the occupation forces over the past 75 years, the flagrant violations against the Palestinian people, the occupation of Arab territories in Syria and Lebanon, the repeated attacks, they all constitute a blatant violation of international law and international humanitarian law. These crimes, the massacres, the violence, including the recent unjust attacks on the city of Beirut that claimed the lives of thousands of Lebanese, deepen the wounds and aggravate the conflict in the region. The war has entered a very dangerous phase that portends more destruction and killing. It would exceed what we've seen in the past days as occupation forces continue with their genocidal act, with their killings that amount to war crimes and genocide and the genocide. Occupation forces are disregarding international humanitarian law and human norms, acting impetuously without any deterrent.
إذ أن ما تقوم به قوات الاحتلال
Occupation
الإسرائيلي
forces
من
are
جرائم قتل
trying to
جماعي
find false
متعمد
pretexts
للمدنيين
to
في غزة
defend the
وفي
commission of
لبنان
those
في
crimes.
الأراضي
Occupation
العربية
forces are
المحتلة
committing
الأخرى
crimes of
هي
deliberate mass killings
جرائم
of
يندى
civilians
لها
in
جميع
Gaza and Lebanon
الإنسانية
and other
وتبين حجم الوحشية
occupied Arab territories.
والسلوك
These crimes
العدواني
are
لسلطات
despicable.
الاحتلال.
They reflect the
وأمام المجتمع
brutality and
الدولي
hostile
اليوم
behavior of
مسؤولية
occupation
قانونية
forces.
وإنسانية
The
وأخلاقية
international community is
تختبر فيها
now before
إنسانية
a legal,
المشتركة
humanitarian,
بالاستجابة،
and moral
إذ أن الحرب
responsibility
التي
that
تشنها
tests
قوات
our
الاحتلال
common
الإسرائيلي على
humanity.
قطاع غزة غادرت فكرة الدفاع
The
عن
international
النفس
community
كما تدعي
must
إسرائيل
state
رغم
that the
بطلانها
war
شرعيا
launched on Gaza
واتخذت
is not
مسار
an act of
الانتقام
self-defense as
والإبادة
Israel claims.
الجماعية
This claim is
وهذا ما
legally
تؤكده
invalid.
الأرقام
Israel
المرعبة
took the path of
للضحايا
vengeance
من
and genocide.
المدنيين
This is confirmed
الفلسطينيين
by the
واللبنانيين
horrifying numbers of
من الأطفال
casualties,
والنساء
Palestinian
وكبار السن
civilians,
بل وحتى موظفي
women,
الأمم
children, the
المتحدة
elderly,
وعوائلهم
even
في
UN
سابقة
staff
خطيرة
and their
غير
families. This is
مشهودة.
a dangerous precedent that
كما
we've
أن
never
توسيع
seen
رقعة
before.
الحرب
The war on
على
Gaza
غزة
has
وانتقالها إلى
expanded to
لبنان
include
وآخرها ما
Lebanon.
قامت
Most
به من
recently,
اعتداء
we've
آثم جديد
witnessed
باغتيال
an
الأمين
unjust
العام
attack
لحزب
that
الله
led to
السيد
the
حسن نصر الله
assassination
ورفاقه من
of
رجال المقاومة
Sayyid Hassan
واحتمالية
Nasrallah
توسع هذه الحرب إلى
and
دول
other
أخرى في
resistance
المنطقة
figures. The
يشكل
war can
تهديدا
further
خطيرا على
expand
استقرار
to
منطقة
include
الشرق
other
الأوسط
countries in the
بأسرها
region. This is a
وينذر
threat to the
بعواقب
stability of the Middle
وخيمة
East as a
تتعدى
whole.
حدود
This
النزاعات
scenario can
المحلية
have grave
وقد
repercussions that
تشهد
go
تصعيدا
beyond the
واسعا
borders of
يشمل
local
هجمات
conflicts. We might
متبادلة
be seeing a wider
لتشمل
escalation
تهديدا
that
شاملا
includes
للاستقرار
mutual
الإقليمي
attacks,
والدولي
which would be a
خاصة
serious
إذا
threat
تدخلت
to
قوى
international
إقليمية
and regional
أخرى
stability,
في
especially if
المعادلة
other regional
مما
powers
يجلب
joined this
تدخلات
equation,
دولية
which would invite
تفضي إلى تعقيد الوضع
international interventions
بشكل
that would
أكبر
further complicate the
وتؤدي إلى عدم
situation,
الاستقرار
that would
السياسي والاجتماعي
jeopardize political
وتفاقم
and
الأزمات
social
الإنسانية
stability, that would
وإلى نزوح
aggravate
جماعي
humanitarian
للسكان
crisis, that would
وزيادة في
lead to
عدد
mass
اللاجئين
displacement, that would
والمشردين
lead to an increase
داخليا
in the number of refugees and IDPs,
وسيزيد
that would
الضغط
increase
على
the
دول
pressure
الجوار
on
وحتى
neighboring
الدول
countries,
الأوروبية
even European
إضافة إلى
countries.
التبعات
Such
الاقتصادية
developments would
السلبية
also have
حيث
negative
ستتعطل
economic
الأنشطة الاقتصادية
consequences, as
وتزداد
economic
معدلات الفقر
activities
والبطالة
would be
كما أن
disrupted.
التوترات ستؤدي
Poverty and unemployment
إلى
rates
ارتفاع
would
أسعار
surge.
النفط
Such tensions would lead to an increase in oil
مسارات الشحن
prices
البحري
if
أو مصادر
maritime
الطاقة.
navigation routes and energy
السيد الرئيس،
sources were
يدين
affected.
العراق
Madam
التصريحات
President,
والتهديدات
Iraq
التي
condemned
أطلقها
statements and threats
رئيس
by
وزراء
the
سلطة
Prime
الاحتلال
Minister
الإسرائيلي
of the
ضد دول
Israeli
المنطقة
Occupation
لأن
Authority
مثل تلك
against countries of
التصريحات
the region.
التصعيدية
Such escalatory
تساهم في تأجيج
statements
الصراعات
fuel
وتدفع المنطقة
conflicts and
نحو
push
مزيد من
the region
التوتر
towards
والحرب.
more tension and
فتلك
war.
التهديدات
Such
العلنية
public
لا
threats
تعتبر
are not
استفزازية
only
فقط
provocative,
بل
they
تشكل
also
أيضا
constitute
انتهاكا
a
صريحا
clear violation
لمبادئ
to
القانون
the
الدولي
principles of
وميثاق
international
الأمم
law and
المتحدة
United Nations
الذي
Charter,
يحظر التهديد
which
باستخدام القوة
prescribe
ضد
the
الدول ذات
threat
السيادة.
of use of force
في
against
الختام
sovereign
السيد
states. In
الرئيس
conclusion,
يؤكد
Madam
العراق
President, Iraq
تضامنه التام والكامل مع
expresses
قضية
its
الشعب
full
الفلسطيني
solidarity with the
العادلة
just cause of the
ويدعم بقوة
Palestinian people.
تطلعاته
We
المشروعة
strongly
في نيل
support its
حقوقه في إقامة
aspirations to
دولته
be
المستقلة
granted its
وعاصمتها
rights to
القدس الشريف.
establish an
كما
independent
يؤكد
state,
العراق
its
بدعمه
independent state with
وتضامنه
Al-Quds Sharif
مع
as its
لبنان
capital.
حكومة
Iraq expresses its
وشعبا
support
ضد
and
الاعتداءات
solidarity with the
السافرة
government and people
والهمجية
of
التي
Lebanon
تنتهك
against
سيادتها
the
وحرمة
barbaric
أراضيها.
attacks
وشكرا
that
جزيلا سيد
violate
الرئيس.
the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon. I thank you, Madam President.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Irak et j'invite maintenant le représentant de la République arabe syrienne à prendre la parole.
Representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you,
سيد
Madam
الرئيس،
President. Madam President,
اسمح لي بداية
allow
أن
me
أستهل
at the
بياني
outset
بتهنئتكم
to
على تولي
تولي بلادكم رئاسة مجلس
on your
الأمن
assumption
للشهر
of the
الجاري
presidency of the Security
وأن أشكر
Council this
سلفكم
month. I
على
thank your
رئاسته
predecessor
وإدارة أعمال المجلس
for
الشهر
conducting
الماضي.
the work of the Security Council
كما
last
أشكر
month.
السيد
I would
الأمين
also
العام
like to
للأمم
thank the
المتحدة
Secretary General
على
of the United
مشاركته
Nations for
وحرصه على الحضور معنا
participating
في
and
هذه
being with
الجلسة
us today in
وأعرب
this
له عن
session.
تضامننا
We
معه
stand in
في وجه
solidarity
الحملات
with him
العدائية
in the face
الإسرائيلية
of
الموجهة ضده.
the Israeli campaigns against
سيد
him.
الرئيس،
Madam President,
لقد عقد مجلس
for
الأمن
the past
على
months,
مدى الأيام
the
الماضية
Security Council
جلسات متتالية لمناقشة
held
العدوان
successive
الإسرائيلي المستمر
sessions to discuss the
على الشعب
continued Israeli
الفلسطيني
aggression on the
وعلى
Palestinian
دول
people
منطقتنا.
and on the countries of our
وما
region.
كنا لنصل إلى
We
ما
would not
وصلنا
have
إليه
gotten
اليوم
here
ونعقد هذه
we would
الجلسة
not be
الطارئة
holding this
وربما غيرها في الأيام
emergency
القادمة
session and maybe
لو أن
other sessions
مجلسكم
in the next days
قام
had your
بمسؤولياته
council
الأساسية
shouldered its
في
main
حفظ السلم
responsibility
والأمن
in the main place
الدوليين
of international
منذ
peace
بدء
and
العدوان
security
الإسرائيلي
since the
الهمجي
beginning
على
of
غزة.
the barbaric Israeli aggression on Gaza.
لقد طالب معظم قادة
The
وممثلي
majority
الدول
of
الأعضاء
leaders and
الذين
representatives of
اعتلوا
member states
منبر
who
الجمعية
spoke
العامة
at the General
خلال
Assembly in the
النقاش العام
past
رفيع
few
المستوى
days during the
طالبوا
high-level general
مجلس
debate,
الأمن
they called upon the
بالتحرك
Security
الفوري
Council
لوقف
to take
العدوان الهمجي
immediate
الإسرائيلي
action to stop
على
the
الشعب
barbaric
الفلسطيني
Israeli aggression on the Palestinian
والاعتداءات
people
الإسرائيلية
and to stop
المتكررة
the
على دول
repeated
المنطقة
Israeli attacks on the states of the
والتحرك
region,
لوضع
to
قراراته ذات الصلة
implement its
موضع التنفيذ
resolutions to end
لإنهاء الاحتلال
the
الإسرائيلي
Israeli
للأراضي العربية
occupation
المحتلة
of
ووقف
Arab
ممارساته
occupied
الإجرامية
territories to
المتواصلة منذ
stop its
عقود.
continued crimes which
وقد
started
عكست
decades
بياناتهم
ago.
إرادة
Their
دولية
statements
حقيقية
reflected a
لوضع
genuine
حد
international will
لتفلت
to put
كيان
an end
الاحتلال
to the
الإسرائيلي
impunity of the
وهوسه
Israeli
بإشعال
occupation
الحروب
entity
وإراقة
and its
الدماء.
obsession with war and bloodshed.
لقد قوبلت تلك المطالبات
All these calls
بإمعان
were
مجرمي
met
الحرب
by
الإسرائيليين
Israeli war
في أعمالهم
criminals
العدوانية
continuing
الإجرامية
their criminal
في
aggression in
فلسطين
Palestine,
وسوريا ولبنان
Syria, and Lebanon,
ومفاخرتهم
showing off
بازدرائهم
their
للقانون الدولي
violations of international
وميثاق
law
الأمم
and the UN
المتحدة
Charter.
وكيل الاتهامات
They have
لمنظمتنا
been leveling
ومحاولة
accusations against
ترهيب
our
ممثليها
organization and trying to
ووكالاتها
terrorize its
بما فيها
representatives and
الأونروا.
agencies, including UNRWA.
إننا نجتمع اليوم
We meet
وقد
today
وصلت منطقتنا بالفعل
as
إلى
our
شفا حرب
region is on the
مدمرة
brink of an
لا
all-out
تستثني أحدا.
destructive war that
ولم
can
يعد من
spare no
المقبول
one.
أن
It
يقتصر
is no longer
رد فعل
acceptable for
مجلس
the
الأمن
Security Council
على مجرد
response
عقد
to be
الجلسة
limited
والأخرى
to holding
دون
session
اعتماد
after
أي
session
مخرجات
without adopting
تفضي
any product
لتحرك
that could
جاد
lead to
وملموس.
a serious and tangible
وإذا
action.
أردنا أن نكون أكثر تحديدا
To be more specific,
فإن إحجام الولايات
the
المتحدة
reluctance of the
عن
United
دجم هذا
States to
الجنون
stop
الإسرائيلي
this Israeli
لا
madness,
بل دعمه
but rather
وتشجيعه
supporting and encouraging
ومنعها
it,
مجلس الأمن من
while
القيام
preventing
بدوره
the
في حفظ
Security
السلم
Council
والأمن
to
الدوليين
shoulder its responsibility, namely
هو
to
الذي
maintain
دفع
international peace and
بالأوضاع إلى
security,
هذه المرحلة
is what
الخطيرة.
got us to this dangerous
ولا يمكن
situation.
للإدارة الأمريكية
The
أن
US
تنفي
administration
مسؤوليتها
cannot deny its
عبر الإدلاء
responsibility by
ببيانات
making
للإعراب عن
statements to
القلق
express concern,
أو
or
التحذير من
warning
خطورة التصعيد
against
والدعوة
dangerous
إلى ضبط النفس،
escalation, or calling for
وهي تمضي
restraint,
في الوقت نفسه في تقديم الدعم اللامحدود
at the time
المتعدد
when
الأوجه
it continues to
لكيان
provide
الاحتلال الإسرائيلي
unlimited,
والتعهد
multifaceted
بحمايته
support
من
to the
المساءلة
Israeli occupation
وتمكينه من
entity,
الإفلات من
vowing to
العقاب.
protect it from
السيدة الرئيسة،
accountability and ensuring its
لم
impunity.
تكتفي
Madam
سلطات الاحتلال
President,
الإسرائيلي
it was not enough for the
بعشرات
Israeli
آلاف الأرواح
occupation
التي
authorities
أزهقتها
to see the tens of
والدماء
thousands
التي
of lives they
أراقتها
have killed, to see the
والبنى التي
bloodshed,
دمرتها في فلسطين
to see
المحتلة،
the infrastructure they destroyed
بل
in
إنها
occupied
واصلت مساعيها
Palestine.
لتصعيد
They
الأوضاع في
continued the
المنطقة
escalation in the
والدفع بها
region,
نحو حرب
pushing it
شاملة
towards a
من
full-on
خلال
war
مواصلة
by
اعتداءاتها
continuing
على
their
دول
attacks on
المنطقة
the states
ومنها
of the
بلاد
region,
سوريا،
including my
حيث
country,
شنت
Syria.
قوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي
The Israeli occupation
اعتداءات
forces
متكررة
launched
طالت
repeated
المدنيين
attacks
الآمنين
targeting civilians in
والمنشآت
safe
المدنية
areas, targeting
والأبنية
civilian
السكنية
infrastructure
لا
and
بل حتى
residential
المقرات
buildings,
الدبلوماسية.
even targeting
وقد
diplomatic
استهدف آخر
premises.
تلك
The
الاعتداءات
latest
فجر يوم
attack
أمس
on
الاثنين
Monday
وبالطيران الحربي
targeted a
والمسير
number of
عددا من
safe
المناطق
residential neighborhoods and
والأحياء
regions
السكنية
in
الآمنة في
Damascus
مدينة
with
دمشق،
drones and
ما
airstrikes,
أدى إلى استشهاد 3 مدنيين
killing
بينهم
3
صحفية
civilians, including 1
وإصابة
journalist,
9
and
آخرين
injuring 7
ووقوع
others,
أضرار
while
كبيرة
also
في
causing
الممتلكات.
tremendous property damage.
وقبل قليل استهدف عدوان
A
إسرائيلي
few
آخر
minutes ago,
مبنى
another
سكني
Israeli aggression
في
targeted
دمشق
a residential
وأدى في
building in
حصيلة
Damascus,
أولية
leading
لاستشهاد 3 أشخاص
to the killing
وإصابة
of
آخرين.
3 people and injuring others. Those are the preliminary
وفي لبنان
numbers.
الشقيق
In
وبعد
brotherly
استخدام
Lebanon,
سلطات الاحتلال المجرمة
the criminal
أجهزة
occupation
اتصالات
authorities
مدنية
use
للقتل
civilian
civilian communication equipment to conduct mass killing.
عمدت لحشد
And
قواتها
then
تمهيدا لغزو بري لجنوبه وقامت
they
بعدوان
mobilized
غادر
their
وجبان
forces in
استهدفت فيه
preparation
بعشرات القنابل
of
المحملة بأطنان من المواد المتفجرة
an
عددا
incursion.
من الأبنية السكنية
They
في الضاحية
targeted a
الجنوبية لبيروت
number of
بهدف
residential
اغتيال
buildings
الأمين
in the
العام لحزب
southern
الله السيد حسن نصر الله الذي قاد مقاومة وطنية
suburb of
لبنانية
Beirut
مشرفة
in order to assassinate the Secretary General of Hezbollah, who led an honorable Lebanese national resistance against the Israeli occupation. All these different forms of the barbaric Israeli occupation on our region were also perpetrated during the General Assembly, during the high-level week of the General Assembly, which reflects Israel's contempt for our organization and the cause of its member states. The so-called Israeli Prime Minister boasted about taking the decision of attacking the southern Beirut suburb from here in New York, following a propaganda campaign full of misleading lies that he launched during his statement, while the majority of delegations refused to listen to him. The Syrian Arab Republic condemns all the continued Israeli aggression on the states of the region. We call upon the Security Council to take immediate action to put an end to the Israeli impunity, which is setting the region on fire, which is threatening international and regional peace and security. We reaffirm our legitimate right to defend our people and land, to fight these crimes with all the means guaranteed by the international law. We also reaffirm that we stand with the Palestinian and Lebanese people. We fully support them despite the grave challenges facing Syria caused by the aggressive policies adopted by Western states in service of Israel, and despite the illegitimate coercive measures and inhumane blockade imposed on Syria, Syria will spare no effort to provide humanitarian assistance to our brothers and sisters in Lebanon. We have mobilized as a government and civil society all our energy and resources to help all those coming from Lebanon, be they Syrian, Lebanese, or from other nationalities. Madam President,
لقد نص الميثاق في مادته 51 على حق الدول في الدفاع الشرعي عن النفس وهو حق راسخ للدول والشعوب لا يملكه كيان الاحتلال الإسرائيلي بأي حال من الأحوال. هذا ما أكدته محكمة العدل الدولية لأن الاحتلال وما يمثله من أعمال عدوان هو الجريمة الأساس التي تحرم مرتكبيها من أي حقوق. لقد مكن تقاعس مجلس الأمن كيان الاحتلال الإسرائيلي من تجاوز جميع الخطوط الحمراء، الأمر الذي دفع جمهورية إيران الإسلامية لممارسة حقها في الدفاع المشروع عن النفس استنادا للمادة 51 من الميثاق وردا على جرائم العدوان الإسرائيلي الاحتلال الإسرائيلي. إن قيام إيران بالرد بعد فترة طويلة من ضبط النفس ومن العمل على تلافي المزيد من التصعيد
and attempts to prevent further escalation. The Iranian response was limited to military and security facilities. This stresses Iran's responsible approach regarding international and regional peace and security. We were not surprised to hear the representative of the US administration and a number of her alliances criticize the Iranian response. These states look at the charter as a tool that they use at their own whims to target their foes and protect their partners.
وقد استمعنا مرارا
We have listened time and again to the representatives of successive US administrations presenting false and distorted interpretations of Article 51 of the Charter to justify aggression on states that are thousands and thousands of miles away, to occupy their land, to loot their resources under the pretext of quote-unquote protecting or maintaining national US security or fighting terrorism, while prohibiting other states from practicing their legitimate right to self-defense at their immediate borders in the face of a genuine aggression against them. In conclusion, Madam President,
لقد قال ممثلو الدول الأعضاء
The
الذين
representatives
اعتلوا
of
منصة
member
الجمعية
states
العامة
who took
خلال
the
الأيام
floor and
الماضية
spoke at the
كلمتهم
General Assembly in the last few days
وعلى
have
مجلس الأمن
spoken.
أن
It
يصغي
is now high time for the
ويعمل
Security
بشكل
Council
جاد
to
وفوري
listen, to
لإنهاء
take
المعاناة
urgent
الإنسانية
and
في
serious
غزة
steps to stop
ووقف
the
الدم النازف
continuing
في
suffering
المنطقة
in Gaza, to
ووضع
stop the
حد
bloodshed in the
بشكل
region,
فوري
to
وغير
put an
مشروط
immediate and
للعدوان
unconditional
الإسرائيلي
end
على
to the
فلسطين
Israeli
وسوريا ولبنان
aggression on Palestine,
وإنهاء
Syria, and
الاحتلال
Lebanon,
الإسرائيلي
to
للأراضي
stop and
العربية
end the Israeli
من
occupation
خلال
of Arab
تنفيذ
territories
قرارات
by
مجلسكم ذات
implementing
الصلة.
the relevant Security
شكرا
Council
سيد الرئيس.
resolutions. Thank you, Madam President.
Je remercie le représentant de la
I thank
République arabe
the
syrienne et je passe la
representative of the
parole au
Syrian Arab
représentant de
Republic, and I
l'Italie.
give the floor to the representative of Italy.
Madam President, let me first congratulate you for assuming the presidency in this month of October, and also to thank the Secretary General for his briefing and his work. Italy firmly condemns yesterday's Iranian missile attack on Israel. We express deep concern for the ongoing developments and call for restraint and responsibility on all regional actors. Avoiding any further spiral of escalations has to be our common priority, our top priority, as well as preventing another dramatic humanitarian outburst. Italy will continue to work for a diplomatic solution, also in its capacity as G7 rotating president, for the stabilization of the Israeli-Lebanese border, and in this regard strongly recalls the leaders' declaration of September 25 for a 21-day ceasefire in Lebanon. And while we are gathering now, our Prime Minister is about to host a call of the leaders of the G7 to discuss the situation in the region. Italy calls on all parties involved for the full implementation of Resolution 1701 and invites the Security Council to consider to make the implementation of UNIFIL's mandate more effective, with a view to ensure the security along the Blue Line and to grant the displaced population of northern Israel and Lebanon to safely return home. The security of all UNIFIL personnel has to be respected and fully guaranteed. Sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon needs also to be respected. Madam President, Italy calls for an immediate ceasefire in Lebanon. We will continue to work for a diplomatic solution, and we are ready to assist the Lebanese armed forces in assuming the responsibilities along the border with Israel. To such extent, Italy also deems of utmost importance to fully support and revamp the Lebanon-Israel negotiations to peacefully establish their borders. We will continue to engage with our partners and allies and to keep open channels of dialogue with all the actors in the region. At the same time, it is equally urgent to reach an agreement for a ceasefire in Gaza and to release the hostages in line with Resolution 2735. At this specific time, it is our collective responsibility to call for calm and restraint, aware of the fact that every minute that goes by, the lives of innocent men, women, and children of the entire region hang in the balance. Italy is a firm supporter of the principle two peoples, two states, and shares the goal of a comprehensive, lasting regional peace that can ultimately be achieved on the basis of a two-state solution, with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security within agreed, recognized borders, and full recognition of Israel's existence and respect of its security by all regional actors. I thank you.
Merci le représentant d'Italie. Il n'y a plus d'orateurs ou
Italy.
d'oratrices inscrits sur la liste. Je remercie chaleureusement le secrétaire général et j'invite à présent les membres du Conseil à poursuivre l'examen de la question dans le cadre de consultation. La séance est levée.